Hey guys, tonight we're travelling back to a time when survival didn't come with central heating, Gore-Tex, or even a decent pair of boots. You're headed west, way west, past the comforts of brick chimneys and familiar roads, into the brutal and beautiful unknown of early America. There's no furnace humming, no steaming mugs of cocoa, and no, absolutely no fireplaces, because you haven't even managed to build a roof yet. Welcome to the frontier, where the wind has teeth, and the snow doesn't politely fall, it charges, where your best hope for warmth might just be whatever animal hasn't frozen stiff. And yes, you probably won't survive this, but it'll be a heck of a ride trying. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not a trapper, I'm not hunting for likes, I just want to know this isn't echoing into the void. Drop your city and what time it is right now in the comments. I want to see who's listening and where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just stepped off the last rickety wagon in the train. It's late September, and you're standing on the endless sweep of the Great Plains. No towns, no smoke on the horizon, just wind, waving grass, and a sudden quiet terror in your gut. You look around at your fellow settlers and nobody's saying it out loud, but the question's in everyone's eyes. How the hell do we sleep here when winter hits? The land rolls like a frozen ocean. Trees are scarce, mostly hugging rivers miles away. You left behind your iron stove, too heavy, and the little cabin you thought you'd build, that's going to take more time than you have. The sun's slipping lower, and a bitter edge sharpens the air. You hunker down and start digging into the earth, not for treasure, just for survival. It turns out the sod beneath your feet is the only building material that doesn't have to be dragged 50 miles. You use your spade to carve bricks of thick, root-woven prairie turf. The grass still clings to them like green wigs. They're heavy, damp and stubborn, but they stack. Slowly, your first shelter rises. 3 feet thick walls made of dirt and dead grass, stitched together by desperation. You slap on a roof made of more sod, maybe a few boards if you've got them. It leaks, it groans, but it holds. Kind of. There's no chimney yet, just a hope you won't choke when you light a fire inside. But for now it's a roof, and it smells faintly like cow manure and wet socks. At night the real test begins. You lie down on a bed of straw, or maybe just some blankets if you're lucky. There's no fire, not enough fuel to burn all night, and you don't want to fill this tiny mud cave with smoke. So you wrap yourself in every layer you own. Wool, leather, even burlap sacks if you're out of options. Your breath curls in the air above you. You can see it. You can count it. Outside, coyotes howl. The wind presses on the walls like it's trying to squeeze you out. There's a sound in the rafters, some rodent taking shelter in your roof. You can't blame it. Everyone's trying to stay warm. You curl up tighter and tighter. You try to sleep, but your feet have gone numb and your back's cramping. You wonder how much colder it can get. The answer, which you'll learn too soon, is always colder. Here's the weird thing. Despite the lack of a fireplace, sod houses actually hold heat better than the wooden cabins most people imagine when they think pioneer. Those thick earthen walls insulate against wind. If you can get a small fire going in a corner, maybe in a tin bucket lined with stones, you can trap enough warmth to stay just above freezing. You won't be cozy, but you won't be dead, which is pretty much the victory condition out here. Historical fact, sod houses, or soddies, became the go-to shelter for settlers in places like Kansas and Nebraska. They were ugly, yes, but they worked, even when the snow piled up against their low, lumpy walls. Fringe fact, some settlers actually moved back into their wagons for winter, burying the wheels in snow or earth for insulation, and using tarps to enclose the space. It wasn't warm, but at least it didn't collapse when it rained. Open debate. Some historians argue whether sod houses were more durable than log cabins in the long run. Plenty of old photographs show soddies lasting decades. Others claim they were temporary, barely livable solutions. It might depend on how good you were with a shovel and whether your cow stopped eating the walls. Tonight, as you drift off in your scratchy blankets, you'll learn a simple truth. Survival isn't about comfort. It's about adaptation. And on the frontier, that means sleeping in a mud cave while hoping you don't wake up frozen solid. Morning comes, not with sunlight, but with a strange bluish glow creeping through the oiled fabric that serves as your window. The air inside your sod house is just a degree warmer than the world outside, enough to keep your breath from forming icicles, but not enough to make you eager to move. You sit up slowly, joints stiff, shoulders sore from curling into a human pretzel. You slept in your coat, you might even still be wearing your boots, and you're seriously reconsidering all your life choices. The ground beneath your sleeping spot is hard-packed and cold. The straw bedding helped, but it's already starting to compress into something that feels suspiciously like punishment. Your first task today, not farming, not hunting. It's figuring out how to survive the next night with a little more grace, or at least a little less chattering of teeth. You step outside into a wind that feels like it was sharpened by knives, and you finally get it. This isn't just about braving the cold, it's about engineering against it. You need better shelter, and the answer, as laughable as it seems at first, is grass. Dirt and grass. You spend the next week building, not up, but inward. Your sod house becomes something closer to a bunker. You thicken the walls, you add layers of dried grass stuffed into every crevice, even the ceiling. It smells musty, like an unwashed barn, but it blocks the wind. You stack sod like bricks, overlapping, with the grass side down for extra density. Over the door you nail a quilt, old, patched, and thick enough to double as a rug. Now comes the challenge of sealing out the air without suffocating. You carve a tiny vent near the ceiling, barely the width of your fist. That, combined with a not quite tight doorway, is your entire ventilation system. It's primitive, but it works, unless the wind shifts just right, in which case your house becomes a smokehouse, and you're the bacon. The big game changer is the hearth. Not a real fireplace, you don't have bricks or a chimney, but you've scavenged some flat stones and built a small fire platform in one corner. A cooking pan, elevated on a couple of rocks, becomes your version of central heating. You use buffalo chips and dried grass as fuel. It's not the cosy crackle of a wood fire, it's more like angry hissing, but it's heat, and you're not picky. At night, the difference is noticeable. You can keep a small low fire going while you sleep, carefully, cautiously. You bank the embers before lying down, piling a few stones nearby to warm and set near your feet. Your breath still fogs the air, but your fingers don't go numb quite as fast. You don't have to sleep fully dressed anymore, just mostly dressed. Historical fact, sod houses had an incredible R value. That's thermal resistance for those who skipped science class. Those thick walls made from layers of dirt and root-bound turf were surprisingly efficient at keeping heat in and wind out. The downside? When it rained, they sometimes sprouted mushrooms. And yes, your ceiling could literally start growing things. Fringe fact, pioneers often coated the inside walls of sod houses with a thin layer of plaster or even dried cow dung to seal out insects and drafts. You had to get over the smell pretty fast. Survival doesn't pause for your delicate sensibilities. Open debate. Some early records claim sod houses were nearly impossible to keep clean. Others argue they were easier to maintain than wood cabins because the dirt walls actually absorbed smoke and odours, which is true. Depends on whether your roof collapsed during a thunderstorm. That night, you light your fire with a kind of reverence. You feed it carefully, a little fuel at a time. You boil some water, half for cooking, half to pour into a tin cup you'll clutch in bed. You crawl under your covers, warmed by heated stones tucked into old socks at your feet. The fire's glow flickers on the sod walls, casting shadows that look almost like home. Almost. As you settle in, the wind roars outside, but it can't quite reach you. Your little sod bunker might look like a heap of weeds from the outside, but inside it's your fortress, and you realise you've built a womb from the earth, a place to hide, a place to survive. Still, every creak in the walls makes you wonder if they'll hold. And you notice something strange in the air, a faint, sweet, earthy smell. The grass in your ceiling is starting to dry out. If a spark leaps from your makeshift hearth, you're done for. You fall asleep with that thought nudging the back of your mind like a mouse scurrying in the dark. Your dreams that night are strange, half memory, half fear. You're back in your old house with glass windows and a stove that never went out. But snow starts blowing in through the walls, and when you reach for the thermostat, it's just a cold stone. You wake up with your arms stretched out, fingers clutching straw. Outside, the blizzard's finally starting to form. You can hear the flakes tapping against your little grass and mud cocoon. The world is turning white and wind-blown, but for now, you're warmish, safe-ish, and better off than you were the week before. Not bad for a home built from dirt. The next morning, you wake up with a buffalo robe halfway in your mouth and someone's knee in your back. That's because tonight, there's no such thing as personal space. You're sleeping pioneer style now, and pioneer style means you're spooning whether you like it or not. It starts innocently enough. One particularly cold night, a neighbour comes by, his wife and 2 small kids in tow, and asks if they can hunker down with you just for the night. Their roof blew off in the windstorm, and they have nowhere else to go. Of course, you say yes. You make room, shift supplies, spread blankets, but then it doesn't stop. The temperature keeps dropping, and the next thing you know, a cousin, a friend, a widower and his goat all join the sleepover. Before long, your sod house is more packed than a tin of smoked herring, and now you learn a crucial frontier truth. Body heat is currency. Buffalo robes are thick, smelly, and just this side of magical when it comes to holding warmth. The thing is, you've only got one, so everyone ends up sharing, sleeping side by side, practically on top of each other, like layered pastries in a slow-baking survival tart. You take turns being on the outer edge, where the cold can creep in through the wall cracks. Nobody wants the edge. You start to understand the ancient art of group sleeping politics. Who gets the warm centre? Who gets the breezy draft corner? Who snores so badly that you consider risking frostbite just to sleep further away? These are the unspoken negotiations of winter on the frontier. You wrap your legs around the closest warm body, try not to think too hard about whose foot that is, and close your eyes. It's not glamorous. It's not even remotely sanitary. But hey, you're alive. And in this kind of cold, that's saying something. Historical fact. Buffalo robes, tanned bison hides with the fur left on, were prized for warmth and often passed down or bartered like family heirlooms. A single robe could cover multiple sleepers, and settlers would sometimes sleep directly on top of one while wrapping another over the group. Bison may be gone from the plains now, but back then, their hides were survival essentials. Fringe fact, some pioneers swore by sleeping with heated bricks or iron stove parts wrapped in flannel. Others tucked warm potatoes under their blankets. Yes, actual potatoes. They weren't for eating, just for warming frozen toes. Multi-purpose root vegetables, nature's hot water bottle. Open debate. There's an old frontier claim that you could freeze to death from sleeping alone in winter, even inside a shelter. Some historians argue that's dramatic exaggeration, but others note the sheer number of cold-related deaths recorded in local ledgers and diaries. It's hard to prove, but after one night on the drafty side of the buffalo robe, you believe it. Night after night, the group settles into something that almost resembles a rhythm. You each have your designated corner. People know to sleep with their boots on, just in case. Someone takes on the job of tending the fire through the night. A heat watch. Though it mostly involves groggily tossing fuel on the coals while trying not to faceplant into the hearth. Of course, not everything about the group setup is charming. The lack of privacy is intense. The smells, a potent blend of smoke, sweat, old fur and something suspiciously goat-like. And when someone gets up in the night, whether to check the fire or more awkwardly to use the chamber pot, you're reminded just how thin the veil is between survival and indignity. Speaking of the chamber pot, there's one, maybe 2 if you're lucky. And in sub-zero temperatures, you learn the hard way what happens when metal meets skin. The pot itself sits in the far corner under a thin blanket because heaven forbid it actually freezes. You've now experienced the pioneer version of Russian roulette, using it before sunrise and praying your fingers don't stick. Still, for all the rough edges, literal and figurative, the body heat strategy works. Your sleeping arrangement is less of a bed and more of a human Tetris puzzle, but nobody wakes up with icicles on their eyelashes anymore. The group breath makes the air thick, warm, and kind of soupy. In a way, it starts to feel like you've all become one organism, exhaling and surviving as a unit. By now, you've mastered a few tricks. Sleeping close to the floor, warm air rises, yes, but floors hold heat better. Layering 2 or 3 blankets on top but only one underneath, and always drying out your outer layer near the fire during the day, even if it means it ends up smelling like smoked leather jerky. Some nights someone sings, softly, a hymn, a lullaby, a folk tune you don't know but suddenly feel like you've known forever. The sound echoes in the little mudroom, wrapping around the sleepers like a second blanket. It doesn't keep you warm, but it makes the dark a little less sharp. That night, as you shift in your shared bed of straw and fur, you realise you're not just enduring the cold, You're learning its rules, you're adapting, and the frontier doesn't reward comfort. It rewards resilience, ingenuity, and a willingness to be a little gross if it keeps your blood moving. You press closer to the warm body next to you, bury your face in the scratchy buffalo hide, and try to ignore the fact that you can't feel your left foot. It's fine, it'll come back by morning. Probably. The cold comes early, not politely, not gradually, but with full blizzard-level hostility. One morning, you wake up to the sound of a wind howling like it's hunting something, and that something might be you. The sky is a white blur, snow blowing sideways, and the entire sod house shakes like it's trying to decide whether to stay upright or give in to the drama. October isn't supposed to be like this. You expected some chill, maybe a few light flurries, but this is the kind of snowstorm that makes you question every life decision, starting with the one where you left behind 4 walls and a working stove back east. The first hint of trouble came the day before, with a sky that went from bright blue to gunmetal grey in about 15 minutes. You felt it in your fingers, an eerie pressure, a sudden stillness. Even the goat got twitchy. But you didn't have the luxury of overthinking it. You had chores, you had food to store, you had to haul ice-cold water from a creek that was already crusting over at the edges. Then, the storm hit. No warning, no build-up, just a wall of snow slamming into your world and smothering it in seconds. You could barely see the path from the sod house to the outhouse. And that's when it sank in. This isn't a temporary thing. This is winter's opening argument, and it's going to be brutal. You scramble to finish sealing the house. Every crack in the walls is stuffed with whatever you've got. Cloth, grass, hay, even pages from a Bible that was already half-eaten by mice. Windows? Just oiled paper now, maybe waxed linen if you're fancy. You line the bottom of the door with a rolled-up blanket soaked in animal fat. It stinks, but it blocks the draft, and that's a compromise you're happy to make. Inside, everyone goes into cold mode. Extra layers, fire managed with extreme precision, and the buffalo robe now permanently part of your anatomy. Cooking becomes a team effort, mostly because it's a way to huddle around the fire without admitting you're just doing it to warm your hands. A stew made from dried beans and a little salt pork simmers for hours. It smells like hope. The outside world disappears completely. No sound but wind. No light but the dim flicker from the hearth. You're sealed in with 6 other humans and a very flatulent goat. The walls feel closer every hour. Historical fact, the Great Plains are infamous for sudden early snowstorms. In 1880, what settlers would later call the snow winter brought blizzards starting in October and lasting through May. Trains were buried, towns were cut off, pioneers were trapped in their homes for weeks at a time. Sound familiar? Fringe fact, some pioneers hung quilts soaked in brine over doorways and windows, believing it helped block wind and trap heat. Others swore by hanging layers of paper or even old dresses between wall planks. Fashionable? No. Warm? Arguably. Open debate. There's long been debate among historians about whether early settlers underestimated frontier winters or simply had no other option. Diaries swing both ways. Some reveal a stoic will-manage attitude, while others descend into panic by the first real snowfall. Either way, survival wasn't about optimism. It was about adjustment. The first night of the blizzard is the longest you've ever known. You try to sleep, but the wind moans through the sod like a haunted harmonica. The fire burns low, and nobody wants to risk feeding it too much at once. You're rationing fuel, not out of choice, but necessity. Someone suggests taking turns staying awake to keep watch on the fire. You all nod, pretending like it was your idea too. When it's your shift, you sit cross-legged in the dim light, listening to the snores and the occasional shifting of blankets. You stare into the flickering flames, and for a moment you feel like you're the last warm thing left in a world turned to ice. Morning, or what passes for it, brings no sun. Just more snow, deeper now, piled halfway up the doorway. You open it just wide enough to shovel an air path, then quickly seal it shut again. No one wants to step outside. The idea of being separated from the group, even for a few minutes, feels reckless, even dangerous. You've officially entered blizzard lockdown, and you learn something new. Your body adapts. Kind of. You start sleeping in shorter cycles, drifting in and out as the fire rises and falls. You stop noticing the smell. You start appreciating the goat, not just for warmth, but because she provides milk, and her presence is oddly comforting. Her name is Gertrude now, It just happened. You eat slowly, mostly beans and bread fried in lard. You drink hot water with pinches of herbs. It's not gourmet, but it's hot, and that's enough to feel like a small luxury. Someone even tells a joke, a bad one, but you all laugh, half from relief and half from the madness of being snowed in with no end in sight. By the third day, the walls start to crackle from the cold. You reinforce them with more hay. One corner leaks. You stuff it with a boot. Nobody asks whose boot. It works. You make a pact not to open the door, unless absolutely necessary. The house has become an organism, a living thing holding in heat, holding in life. You don't think about how long the blizzard will last. You don't ask. You just keep feeding the fire, feeding each other, and pressing close when the night turns cruel. Because right now, warmth is survival, and survival is everything. By the 5th day of unrelenting snow, your sod house smells like damp wool, boiled beans, and whatever it is that makes goats smell like goats. You've officially run out of fresh air and polite boundaries. The blizzard still hammers the outside world with blind rage, but inside you're busy chasing heat like it owes you rent. Every hour of the day is spent trying to squeeze a little more warmth out of anything that doesn't bite back. The fire's still burning, barely, but you're down to your last bundle of fuel. You eye the wooden handles of your tools and wonder which one you're emotionally prepared to burn first. Not the shovel. You still need that to dig out the doorway. Maybe the broken stool, or the crate you used to sit on, which was never that comfortable anyway. But instead of burning furniture just yet, you lean into something much older and itchier. Hay insulation. It's the frontier equivalent of home improvement, and your materials are, let's say, unconventional. You start by stuffing loose hay into every gap in the walls, not just the obvious cracks, but between the sod bricks themselves. You wedge it tight until you can't even feel a breeze with your hand pressed against the wall. Then you move to the ceiling. This part's trickier. Bits of hay rain down into your hair and mouth as you push more into the gaps between the rafters and the heavy sod above. You start coughing. Someone suggests you wear a scarf over your face like a bandit. It helps. Sort of. Now the real genius move. You build up hay around the outside of the sod house like a nest. You pack it thick and high, especially around the base, hoping it'll add an extra buffer against the cold. It does. A little. And yes, you're very aware you've turned your home into a tinderbox with a live fire in the middle. Still, you're not careless. The fire is kept low, just a whisper of flame under a pan of coals, with the flue cracked just enough to pull smoke out. Every evening before sleep you bank the fire under a layer of ash, a technique someone claims they read about in an old farmer's almanac. It works. Kind of. The fire doesn't go out completely, and in the morning you can coax it back to life without freezing your fingers off trying to strike sparks. Historical fact. Pioneers often used hay and straw as insulation in both sod and wooden homes. They would pack it between walls, lay it under bedding, and even use it to create false ceilings in lofts to trap heat closer to the living space. In some cases, hay bales were stacked around the outside of houses and barns to help buffer against wind and snowdrift. Fringe fact. In extreme conditions, settlers would line their beds with hay or straw and crawl inside like human burritos, sleeping between two mattresses of loose insulation. It wasn't comfortable, but it kept body heat trapped and slowed frostbite from creeping into limbs. Open debate. While hay and straw were excellent insulators, they were also fire hazards. Some historians argue that many cabin fires during the winter months were caused by these improvised insulation methods catching stray embers. Others claim it was more often due to poorly tended hearths. Either way, you learn quickly not to let sparks fly. You don't stop at the walls. You take the hay and stuff it under the straw mattress, then line the bed's edges with rolled blankets to seal in warmth. You pile more blankets on top, layers upon layers until you're practically cocooned. Now it takes effort just to roll over, but that's the point. The less you move, the less heat you lose. Motion is for summer. Winter is about stillness and thick layers. During the day you do small things to keep spirits up. You boil water constantly, not just for drinking, but to fill jars that you roll into the bedding at night. One of the kids starts calling them bed grenades. You don't argue. At this point you'd sleep next to a live porcupine if it radiated enough warmth. You also start drying clothes over the fire, carefully. You string a line and hang socks, mittens, anything too damp to wear. It steams, it smells. But at least now you have one pair of dry pants in rotation. The concept of fresh is long gone. Now it's just less wet versus stiff with ice. Then there's the food situation. It's not glamorous, but it's hot. You eat thick stews made with dried beans, root vegetables, and whatever meat you managed to salt and store before the storm hit. It's survival food, high fat, high calorie, and rich enough to keep you warm through the night. Someone figures out how to make bannock on a hot stone, and suddenly you feel like royalty. It's flat, it's chewy, and it sticks to your ribs like glue. Perfect. When the sun sets, which honestly happens around 4:30 these days, you pile into bed like a herd of sleepy bears, pressed shoulder to shoulder, sharing warmth and maybe a few farts, though no one talks about that part. You try to pretend this is normal, that sleeping like this is just what humans do. Maybe it is, maybe we've just forgotten. And despite everything, the cold, the hay in your hair, the constant low-grade hunger, you feel a tiny sense of pride. You're getting better at this. You've insulated your house with grass and cow dung and prayer, and it's holding. You've kept the fire alive without burning down the house. You've slept through nights that would kill a careless man. And tomorrow, you'll do it again. You've tried everything above ground. Mud walls, hay insulation, heated rocks tucked under, buffalo robes, and yet the cold still seeps in like a ghost through the seams of your hard-earned shelter. It creeps into your joints and coils in your bones. No matter how thick your blankets or how carefully you guard the fire, there's always a moment around 3 a.m. when you wake up cold, your breath rising in little clouds, your toes curled under like dried leaves. That's when the idea hits you. Not up, not out. Down. Dig down or die. That's not dramatic. It's honest. The ground, frozen though it may seem, offers one key advantage. It doesn't change. It's steady, predictable. Below the frost line, the earth holds a constant temperature, hovering just above freezing even when the sky's hurling shards of ice at your roof. And suddenly, you're wondering if the best place to sleep during a blizzard might not be in your house, but beneath it. So, you dig. It starts with a hole in the corner, the softest patch of floor you can find, probably where the goat pees, but no one's picky right now. You chip away with a shovel, then with your hands, clearing out a shallow depression, just wide enough for one person to curl up inside. You line it with straw and old rags, then throw down a blanket, thick and scratchy from weeks of use. It's not much, but when you lie down inside it, something changes. The cold doesn't bite so hard. The wind noise fades. It's quieter, heavier, like you've slipped into the earth's own heartbeat. Others follow. Before long, the house floor becomes a patchwork of sleeping pits, little dugouts for each body, shallow graves that serve the opposite of their usual purpose. Above ground, you are fighting the wind. Below, you're escaping it. By the third night, everyone's got a spot. You find yourself getting used to the ritual. Dig, line, sleep, survive. The goat, unable to resist the coziness, curls up in the largest pit near the fire as if she's figured out the cheat code to frontier living. It's not all glory, of course. Dirt gets everywhere. You're sleeping with your face inches from soil that smells of roots and frost. The straw itches, and your blanket collects more debris every night. But you're warmer, and when survival is the standard, comfort is a bonus, not a right. Historical fact. Early settlers in the American Midwest and Plains states often dug into the ground during extreme weather. Dugouts, shelters built partially or entirely below ground, were common among pioneers, especially before permanent structures were finished. They took advantage of the Earth's insulation and were known to stay surprisingly warm even in deep winter. Fringe fact, some pioneers went full mole and lived in dugout houses for years, carving rooms into hillsides or flat earth, sometimes shoring up the walls with logs or bricks, sometimes just living with the dirt. A few even grew moss gardens inside for moisture control. That's right. Frontier feng shui. Open debate. There's an ongoing debate among historians over whether dugouts were safer than above-ground homes during extreme winter. While they held heat better, they were more susceptible to flooding, rodent infestation, and occasionally structural collapse. Of course, freezing to death in a log cabin wasn't exactly ideal either, so pick your poison. Once you're underground, time changes. Nights feel longer. The weight of the house, of the storm above, presses down in a weirdly comforting way. You lie there in the dark, nestled into your little earth cave, and for the first time in weeks you're not shivering. The warmth of the ground, subtle and slow, wraps around you. It's not a heat that radiates. It just holds. Above you the fire crackles low, shadows dance across the ceiling. Someone coughs, a child whimpers in their sleep, the goat snorts and shifts, but in your hollowed out little nest you feel oddly calm. The kind of calm that comes from finally realizing you've stopped losing. You're not winning exactly, but the cold hasn't beaten you. Not tonight. Of course, nothing's perfect. In the morning you wake up with dirt in your ears, in your hair, and somehow, in your mouth. Your boots are crusted in mud. Your clothes smell like an old barn, but you're breathing. You're not frostbitten, your toes still wiggle, and that's what counts. Someone suggests digging a small trench along the perimeter to catch runoff from snowmelt, or, less pleasantly, to channel the goat's leavings away from the sleeping area. It's a good idea. Gross, but good. The frontier has a way of turning everything into engineering. As the storm continues, your relationship with the earth changes. It's no longer just the thing you walk on or grow food in. It's your partner in survival, your heater, your mattress, your shield. And you start to wonder, just a little, whether we had it wrong all along, building up into the wind instead of burrowing down into something ancient and quiet. That night, tucked into your pit with a heated stone at your feet and a blanket over your head, you drift off faster than you have in weeks. The wind still screams above, battering your little sod home like it's owed something. But you don't care. You've found a way to escape it. You've gone down, and you've survived. The sky finally clears after more than a week of white outrage, but don't get your hopes up. Sunshine doesn't mean warmth, it just gives you a clearer view of the frozen chaos outside your door. The snow is knee-deep, drifted high against the sod walls like the land tried to bury your house out of spite. And inside, the air feels just a hair less miserable. Still cold, still cruel. But the kind of cold you can sigh into instead of curse. That small relief lasts right up until someone knocks loose the oiled cloth you've been using as a window. That's when you realise something you've been avoiding thinking about. You have no glass. Never did. You'd planned to buy panes from a supply town once you'd settled in, but the supply town is now 50 miles away under a glacier, and you're left with nothing but stretched, semi-transparent cloth smeared with soot and fat to keep out the wind. And the wind is back. It snakes through every seam, jabbing fingers into the corners of your eyes and making the fire dance sideways. Your breath fogs heavy in the air again, curling up toward the rafters like it's trying to escape before you do. You throw another blanket over the window, but it's not enough. The air's leaking, the cold is leaking. It's like trying to plug a dam with a biscuit. You get inventive, resourceful, a little feral. You grab whatever you have, rags, burlap, spare clothing, even dried animal skins. You tack them up, layer on layer, until the window's gone entirely and you're back to total darkness. Light becomes a luxury you can't afford. Sunlight means air leaks, and air leaks mean frostbite. So now you live by firelight. The dim orange flicker is all you get, barely enough to see your hand in front of your face. The ceiling feels lower, the walls feel closer. You find yourself blinking more, leaning toward the hearth just to catch a glimpse of the world beyond your own breath. Historical fact: glass was expensive and scarce on the frontier. Many settlers lived without it entirely, using paper soaked in animal fat or wax to create translucent window covers. Some used oiled cloth, often from flour sacks or worn-out shirts, which allowed light in but blocked wind, sort of. Fringe fact: in more extreme cases, windows were simply boarded shut for the winter, and families lived without sunlight for weeks or months at a time. People adapted their sleep schedules to the fire cycle, napping in short bursts when it was warmest and waking during the coldest hours to stoke the flames. Open debate. There's an ongoing historical argument about whether living without natural light in winter led to higher rates of depression and fatigue among settlers. Some diaries describe melancholia and winter madness, while others show pioneers carrying on with forced cheerfulness. Maybe it depended on the fire, maybe it depended on the company. Darkness becomes the new normal. You eat by it, talk by it, stare into it until your thoughts blur at the edges. You stop bothering to get dressed in the morning. Everyone's just wrapped in layers, blankets, robes, whatever cloth hasn't frozen stiff. You don't even unroll the bedding anymore. You just live in it. You're not entirely sure where the clothes stop and the bed begins. The lack of light messes with your brain in quiet, sneaky ways. You lose track of time. Someone says it's Tuesday, but you'd bet your last crust of bannock it's Sunday. or Thursday, or maybe those are the same now. You start measuring the days by firewood levels and stew thickness. The only real sign of time passing is the ice building inside. Yes, inside. The window coverings trap air, but condensation from breath and cooking hangs heavy in the cold air. Every morning you wake up to frost crystals edging the walls and ceiling, like your house is slowly growing teeth. You touch one with your bare hand and immediately regret it. Lesson learned: no skin contact with the walls. To fight the darkness, you try to make more light. You rig up a lantern using a jar of animal fat and a twisted rag as a wick. It sputters and smokes, but it glows. A tiny, greasy flame that lets you see your own shadow again. Everyone gathers around it like it's a campfire, watching it flicker like it holds some ancient truth. Even the children stop asking questions. They're quieter now, not frightened, just dulled. It's hard to stay curious in the dark. You tell stories to keep the silence at bay. You retell the same ones. Then you start making them up. Even the goat gets a starring role in a tale about a blizzard-fighting animal militia. One night someone starts humming. Not a song, just a slow, wandering note that hangs in the air like a heartbeat. Someone else joins in. You hum together, no lyrics, just a kind of vibration that fills the space the cold can't quite reach. You hum like it's keeping the roof from caving in. That night, you lie in your dirt-dug bed and stare up into nothing. No stars, no light. Just blackness wrapped in the thin orange glow of the banked fire. And you think about how much humans depend on light to feel like things are okay. And how now you've learned to settle for warmth instead. Not happiness, not comfort, just warmth. And even that's not guaranteed. You've learned not to count on the fire. It's moody, unreliable. You can do everything right. Stack the buffalo chips just so, bank the coals under ash, guard it like a newborn, and still wake up to find the thing has given up on you, leaving only cold stones and a curl of useless smoke. That's when you get creative. Desperate, really. You start turning to what you once thought were background props in your survival drama. Rocks. Not just rocks, warm rocks. Heated in the fire, tucked into blankets, hidden under straw. At first, it's just to take the edge off the cold at your feet, but soon you're testing how long they hold heat, how hot you can get them before they burn through your bedding, how to stack them around the fire to reflect warmth back into the room. You're basically becoming a pioneer physicist if pioneer physicists had goat hair in their mouths and frostbitten thumbs. One night, with the fire too low to share heat and everyone on the edge of chattering again, you try something new. You take your largest pan, iron, with a dent in one corner from when someone dropped it off the wagon weeks ago, and fill it with stones from just outside the door. You heat the stones over what little flame you've got left, wait until they're searing, then carefully carry the pan into the sleeping area. You set it down in the middle of the bedrolls, everyone curled around it like cats around a space heater. Nobody says anything, but the sighs are practically synchronized. From that point on, heated rocks become the MVP of your winter strategy. You rotate them like they're sacred relics. Someone even sews little cloth sacks so you can tuck stones into your bedding without setting yourself on fire. The goat steps on one and lets out a noise like a harmonica being stepped on, but otherwise it's a solid success. Historical fact: heated stones were commonly used by settlers, and even earlier by indigenous groups to warm bedding, dry clothes, or help with aches in the cold. Placed in kettles or pans, stones could be heated by fire and retained warmth for hours, functioning as early hot water bottles, just less splashy and more blister-prone. Fringe fact: a few frontier journals describe rock circles built indoors, where hot stones were stacked in a ring around a fire pit to reflect heat into the room. Some even added metal, old pans or scraps of copper to intensify the warmth. It worked, unless you tripped and landed on one. Open debate. There's still some question about whether heated stones were safer than open fires inside poorly ventilated shelters. Some historians argue that they were a life-saving heat source. Others say they were the cause of more burns, fires, and cabin panic than they were worth. Judging by the new scar on your wrist, you get the argument. You start incorporating stones into your whole routine. At night, you heat a few and tuck them into bed before you climb in, like you're reserving warmth in advance. During the day, you use them to thaw frozen water, or gently warm your hands without getting smoke in your lungs. Someone even tries cooking with them, placing flat stones under a thin cake of bannock dough, flipping it with a stick. The results are edible-ish. The biggest revelation comes during one especially cruel night. The wind screams like it's lost something and wants you to pay for it. The fire's out. The embers are sulking. No one wants to move. That's when you remember the old tin wash basin tucked under the food crates. You fill it with rocks, heat it in the hearth, then place it directly under your raised straw bed, with a gap underneath to let the warmth rise. It works. Not like a furnace, but enough. It turns your sleep from a full body clench into something approaching relaxation. You call it your bed furnace, and while it smells faintly of scorched earth and desperation, it keeps your toes from going numb before sunrise. Every night now, the fire's just the warm-up act. The stones are the headliner, and because rocks don't need much tending once they're hot, you all sleep a little deeper. That is, until the goat discovers the pan full of stones still radiates warmth and decides it makes an excellent nighttime perch. You wake up with her hooves clanging around like a burglar in your cookware. She's not even sorry. You start building a stone bank near the hearth. Rocks you rotate in and out like a tiny thermal library. Smooth ones hold heat longer. Larger ones cool slower. Jagged ones are banned after someone gashes their shin trying to adjust the fire at night. You're learning the physics of survival by bruises and blisters. In this dim, flickering life, fire becomes less the centerpiece and more of a matchmaker. Just there to heat the real stars of the show, you still need it. But the stones are your friends. They don't smoke, they don't need fuel, and they don't blow out at 3 a.m. They just sit there, holding heat, quiet, reliable. A kind of warmth you can trust. And trust is rare these days. You fall asleep with one under each armpit, one near your knees, and one by your feet. You look ridiculous. You feel warm. You'll take it. At some point during the endless freeze, you stop pretending this is temporary. Winter isn't just a season out here. It's a character, a mood, a demanding houseguest with no intention of leaving. It shapes every breath, every thought, and, increasingly, every bodily function. Which brings us to an uncomfortable truth no one on the frontier really talks about until they have to. What happens when you have to pee in the middle of a blizzard and the chamber pot is frozen solid? Yeah, that moment comes. It starts one frigid morning, early enough that the fire is still barely embers and the world smells like damp wool and desperation. You shuffle across the cold-packed floor in your boots. Yes, you sleep in them now. It's a lifestyle. And reach for the chamber pot in the corner. What greets you is not relief, but a dull clunk. The contents are frozen, fully. An icy disc, thick and opaque, glaring up at you like the final boss of winter survival. The group gathers to observe the horror. No one says anything, but everyone knows what this means. We've reached peak cold. The kind of cold that makes metal stick to skin, that turns water to glass mid-pour, and that renders your last line of indoor plumbing into a solid artifact of your bodily suffering. Solutions start flying fast. Someone suggests peeing into a cloth and wringing it out into the snow. Another floats the idea of just going outside, to which everyone laughs, until it gets real quiet. Because honestly, it might be time to reintroduce ourselves to the outside world, horrifying though it is. Eventually a compromise is reached. You unfreeze the pot, using the fire, a lot of curses and some boiling water, and then, from that point on, assign someone to pot duty. It's their job to keep it warm enough not to freeze. This turns out to be a rotating role, heavily debated and deeply resented. When it's your turn, you treat that pot like a fragile infant. You keep it close to the hearth, rotate it like bread in an oven, and whisper silent pleas that no one knocks it over. Historical fact: chamber, pots were essential to pioneer life, especially during deep winter when venturing outside could literally be fatal. Many settlers kept theirs near the fire, not just for comfort, but to prevent freezing. And some used ash or straw in the bottom to control odour and temperature. Fringe fact: in some cases settlers resorted to peeing in tin cans and tossing the contents out small flaps or cracks in the wall. There's at least one known case of a settler cutting a pee hole into the side of a sod home fitted with a wooden flap for this exact reason. You're horrified, but also a little impressed. Open debate. There's some contention among historians over how often people actually went outside during winter. Some argue the risk of exposure forced pioneers to adapt entirely indoor solutions. Others insist that outdoor privies were used, albeit quickly, and with layers of furs that made everyone look like reluctant bear impersonators. Either way, frozen chamber pots don't lie. Once the chamber pot crisis is temporarily resolved, new issues arise, namely hygiene. You're not bathing, nobody is. There's not enough heat, not enough water, and frankly, not enough privacy to even try. You've entered what you kindly call frontier funk mode. At this point, you're convinced your clothes are developing a personality of their own, but you're not alone. Everyone smells. It's an equal opportunity reek, a blend of sweat, smoke, goat, and something distinctly earthy you choose not to identify. One of the kids draws a little face on a particularly stiff sock. It becomes part of the group. You call him Crispin. He never blinks. You all adapt. Instead of bathing, you do selective washing. A rag, a little warm water, a scrub behind the ears, maybe your hands and face if you're feeling fancy. The rest is left to the gods, and whatever bacteria are now your roommates. One guy insists rubbing snow on your armpits helps. He tries it once. To combat the chill in every possible way, you eat more. It's not even about hunger anymore. It's about fuel. You pack away lard-soaked bread, salt pork, anything with fat. One night you fry cornmeal in bacon grease and feel like royalty. Nobody counts calories here. Every bite is body heat in disguise. The cold also does weird things to your sleep. You start waking up with your mouth frozen open, your breath frozen into little crystals along the edge of your blanket. Your hair gets stiff from moisture in the air. And yes, one unfortunate soul discovers their eyelashes can freeze shut if they sleep too close to the wall. You help them warm up with a hot spoon. They don't thank you. It becomes normal, in a terrifying way. The chamber pot is just one more thing to rotate by the fire. You all develop routines. One person tends the fire. One stirs the beans. One keeps an eye on the stones. You run like a lopsided machine powered by heat, food, and a mutual agreement to ignore how gross everyone has become. But underneath it all, there's a strange pride forming. You're surviving. The pot may freeze again. Your socks may stand on their own. But you're still here. Breathing, eating, joking, barely. At night, you wrap yourself in your stiff, smoky layers and drift off with the faint comfort that even in the darkest cold, human bodies and stubbornness are harder to kill than they look. By now, you've stopped thinking of the bed as yours. It's a shared organism, a heaving, groaning, snoring beast made up of limbs, blankets, buffalo robes, and at least one goat that refuses to sleep anywhere else. Personal space? That's for spring. Now, sleeping is a tactical arrangement, a nightly negotiation of warmth, seniority, and tolerance. And make no mistake, position matters. Everyone knows the middle is the warmest. That's the jackpot, safest from drafts, closest to the heated stones, with at least 2 human radiators pressing in on either side. If you're on the edge, you're exposed to the wall, the wind, the cracks. You're basically the sacrificial icebreaker. Who gets the middle? That's where it gets delicate. Kids get priority, obviously. Then anyone who's sick or shivering too hard to argue. After that, it's politics. You might think you're immune to it, but by night 3 of having snowflakes creep through the wall and land on your cheek while you try to sleep, you start bartering like your life depends on it. I'll take your firewatch tomorrow if I can switch spots tonight. You sleep middle, but you get up to stir the beans. You let me have the warm side. I won't mention how you burned the bannock last night. And sometimes, it's just pure luck. You roll over into the centre when someone gets up to use the chamber pot, and suddenly find yourself basking in heat like a lizard on a rock. You stay very, very still, pretending to be asleep, hoping no one notices. Sleeping order becomes a kind of unspoken hierarchy. The goat, named Gertrude, at this point more family than livestock, sleeps where she pleases, usually curled at someone's feet. Her body heat is welcome, even if she farts like a rusty bellows. No one complains anymore. You've learned to just shift slightly and breathe through your sleeve. Historical fact. In frontier families, it was common for everyone to sleep in one bed, especially during winter. Parents, children, even guests or farmhands might pile in together for warmth. It wasn't about comfort. It was survival. Heated bedrooms were unheard of, and even a draft could mean death in the night. Fringe fact. There are accounts of families arranging themselves in specific sleeping orders to optimize warmth. Older children on the edges, infants in the centre, and sometimes even sleeping head to feet to avoid too much body heat in one area. Some even had rotating warm spots, changing positions each night so no one froze or roasted too much. Open debate. Some historians argue that sleeping together in these tight quarters helped foster stronger family bonds in early settler life. Others say it created intense emotional tension and privacy issues, especially in homes with extended family or neighbours packed in. Either way, intimacy wasn't optional, it was baked into the bedding. Your little group is no exception. You're not a family, not exactly, but you've become something close. Living in a sod house through a prairie winter forces a kind of intimacy that no one prepares you for. You know the rhythm of each other's breathing, who twitches in their sleep, who mumbles half words about home. Someone whispers prayers at night. Someone snores like a freight wagon stuck in the mud. And of course, there's the issue of the nocturnal elbow. It belongs to one of the larger men in the group, and it has a mind of its own. Every few nights it finds your ribs like it's trying to dig for gold. You've taken to sleeping with a pillow tucked against your side like armour. There are awkward moments too. Sleeping this close means waking up to faces inches from yours, to someone's hand on your hip, to legs tangled in a way that would be scandalous back home. But no one talks about it. You all pretend not to notice, because the alternative is sleeping alone in the cold, and nobody's that proud. You've also learned to sync your movements. If someone turns over, the whole group shifts like a school of fish. You roll left, they roll left. One wrong move, and you risk kicking Gertrude or knocking over the pot of heated stones. And trust me, no one wants to wake up to a yelping goat and a scattered pan of lava rocks. The floor beneath you is layered with straw, blankets and wool, packed so tightly that the distinction between bed and ground has vanished. It's just the sleeping space now. And despite the discomfort, the random pokes in the ribs, the smells, the occasional goat hoof to the shin, it works. You all wake up a little warmer than you went to sleep, a little more rested, a little more willing to keep going. During the day, you pretend like none of it happened, like you didn't spend the night spooning a man whose name you still occasionally forget. You all spread out, take your space where you can get it, shake out blankets, air things by the fire. But when the sun dips and the cold creeps back in, no one hesitates. You pile back into the bed, the human nest, the heat huddle, and it feels, weirdly, like home. You've stopped wondering if this is normal. It is. For now. For here. You've adapted. And out here, adaptation is the closest thing you get to peace. You never thought you'd see the day when 10 people and a goat sleeping on a dirt floor inside a grass-roofed mud box would feel organised. But here you are, living in a cramped, windowless oven of breath and wool, and somehow, it's working. Barely. You've hit a strange frontier milestone. The communal huddle has achieved critical mass. There's no more pretending this is a temporary arrangement. The group has merged. 1 room, 10 souls, all surviving on the same fire, eating the same beans, breathing the same air so many times over it's developed an accent. The lines between families have blurred. You've become a single, sprawling, functional chaos blob. It wasn't always 10 people. It started with just you and maybe 2 others. But the storm brought more. Word spread. Neighbours whose roofs collapsed. Wagons lost to drifts. Cabins with chimneys that failed or caught fire. They came knocking, snow-covered and half-frozen, and you didn't ask questions. You made space. Everyone always says there's no room until someone's dying in the snow. Then there's room. Always. And somehow you fit them all. Not comfortably, but completely. 1 family of 4 is camped along the far wall. Husband, wife, 2 soot-smudged kids who mostly sleep and occasionally steal pieces of bread when they think no one's looking. An older woman who says very little occupies the corner nearest the fire, always turning her back as if guarding some secret. 2 brothers have claimed the floor space under the roof's lowest beam and share a single blanket with the efficiency of men who have never once owned anything soft. And then there's you, somewhere in the middle, both in space and in spirit. You didn't mean to become a host, but here you are, head of an accidental 10-person household with 0 privacy, a communal chamber pot, and a goat that now responds to commands in 3 different languages. Historical fact. During harsh winters, it was common for entire communities, or what few families existed nearby, to consolidate into a single dwelling for the duration of a storm. Barns, dugouts, sod houses, even half-built cabins became communal refuges. People pooled food, firewood and blankets. There wasn't a choice. It was freeze together or die apart. Fringe fact. Some settlers reported stacking their sleeping arrangements not just side by side, but vertically. building makeshift bunks from planks or crates so more people could fit in the same space. These top bunks were warmer, heat rises, but riskier. You roll off a hay bale in your sleep and land on a goat, you might not be welcomed back. Open debate. There's disagreement among historians about how long these communal living situations lasted after the immediate threat passed. Some claim families split up as soon as the snow cleared. Others suggest bonds formed during these close-quarters trials lasted for years, sometimes shaping entire town dynamics. Was it temporary teamwork or long-term trust? Hard to say when you're still elbow-deep in smoke and soup. By now, the routine is clockwork. The fire gets tended in shifts. Meals are cooked communally. Whoever's closest to the pot stirs. Everyone eats from the same bowl if spoons are short. Nobody counts portions anymore. You just eat until the food disappears, then scrape what's left for the goat. Gertrude's still holding strong, although you suspect she's become slightly smug with her VIP access to central warmth. At night, the sleep pile grows tighter and the room quieter. The children stopped crying after the second night. They're either comforted by the constant presence of warm bodies or too exhausted to make noise. Conversations are soft now. Whispers in the dark. Stories from home. Snippets of songs. Memories from a time when walls were painted, when beds had legs, when snow stayed politely outside instead of knocking on your door with claws. Privacy is gone, obviously. Everyone knows everyone else's sleep habits, digestive quirks, and preferred blanket corner. You've had more foot-to-face contact in a week than in your entire pre-frontier life. At one point, someone rolls over and hugs you in their sleep. You don't even flinch. You just let it happen. You're not sure what this says about you, but it's definitely something. The air inside has taken on a life of its own. It's thick, moist. It clings to your clothes and your throat. Condensation beads on the sod ceiling and occasionally drips down onto someone's face mid-sleep. This sparks a new level of resourcefulness. Someone rigs a drip cloth from a coat, suspended with rope over the worst spot. It collects water that you then boil for tea. That's right, you're drinking roof sweat, and no one complains. When the sun shows itself, barely, like it's checking in but not staying, you open the door just long enough to let in some fresh air and shovel out snow. 10 bodies create a lot of heat, but also a lot of funk. One brave soul hauls the chamber pot out into the blinding white and empties it without slipping. Everyone cheers. The standards for heroism have plummeted, but the spirit's still alive. Food's holding, barely. Rations are stretched thinner each day. You've entered the let's get creative phase of meal prep. Stews made with potato peelings and leftover beans. Stale bread fried into bricks of survival. Tea made from bark and dried herbs that taste like sadness. Someone claims to know how to make a syrup out of pine cones. No one's desperate enough to test it. Yet. But despite all of this, the stink, the crowd, the goat that chews your bootlaces at 2 a.m. Something is happening here. You're enduring. And not just alone. Together. The 10 of you didn't plan this. You didn't sign up for it. But you're making it work. You've learned to share space, food, warmth, silence. You've figured out how to read the room without words. You know when someone's cold, even if they say they're fine. You know who needs an extra blanket. You know when it's your turn to be the stronger one. And that's what frontier survival is really made of, not just grit and fire and thick socks, but this messy, generous, claustrophobic web of human persistence. 1 room, 10 souls, no fireplace, still here. You start bringing the animals inside around the 3rd week, not just Gertrude the goat, who at this point considers herself management, but the rest of them too. A pair of chickens, one blind in an eye, and both too traumatized by the cold to even cluck properly. A scrawny pig with hooves like ice picks and an expression of deep existential disappointment. And for one unforgettable night, even the mule. Yes, the mule. It's not that you've lost your mind, though there's an argument to be made. It's just that the temperature dropped so low that even the breath from the animals was freezing mid-air. You walked into the lean-to that morning to find one of the hens frozen in a sitting position, like someone had taxidermied it mid-breakfast. That was enough to push you into action. So you flung open the sod house door and announced, to no one in particular, we're moving the barn indoors. Nobody questioned it. That's how you know things have shifted. A few weeks ago, the idea of sleeping next to livestock would have sparked outrage, or at least dry heaving. Now it's met with silent nods and a shuffling of bedrolls. People just make room, so in they come, clop, shuffle, moo. The chickens roost on a rafter beam over the hearth, barely awake. The pig finds a spot near the wall and immediately sinks into a pile of straw, like it's been planning this moment for weeks. Gertrude is not amused. She's clearly been enjoying her status as the indoor animal, and now has to share. She retaliates by standing on your blanket all night and staring directly into your soul every time you roll over. The mule is a one-night arrangement. He refuses to lie down, farts like cannon fire, and knocks over a stack of heated stones with his tail, nearly setting the ration sack on fire. He's politely asked to leave the next morning. You build him a crude windbreak from logs and sod and move him back out with extra hay. He seems fine with it. Honestly, you suspect he hated your stories. Historical fact. In the worst parts of the winter, settlers often brought livestock inside, not just into barns, but into the actual living quarters. A cow, a few chickens, or even pigs might sleep in a corner of the cabin or sod house. Their body heat made a measurable difference in temperature, especially at night. Fringe fact. Some folks swore by sleeping with their cows, quite literally using them as a source of heat, like living, breathing space heaters. There are journal entries describing cattle corners in sod homes, where animals were fenced off but still inside the same room as the family. Smelly? Yes. Effective? Also yes. Open debate. There's some disagreement among scholars on how common this practice actually was. While some accounts describe it as widespread, others suggest it was more of a desperate last resort situation. Either way, it speaks to the sheer inventiveness and lack of alternatives facing early settlers in extreme conditions. The immediate impact of the animals is dramatic. That night the room is noticeably warmer. You don't even need to stoke the fire as often. The combined body heat from 10 people and a barnyard of mammals turns your sod box into a balmy 40 degrees Fahrenheit. A veritable paradise compared to the outdoors. Someone takes off their hat. For 10 minutes, you see their actual hair. It's alarming. But there are trade-offs. Oh yes, chickens don't come with volume control. They cluck in their sleep, flap their wings randomly, and once, one of them drops something into the stew pot. The stew still gets eaten. No one discusses it. You all just chew with a little more caution that night. The pig snores like an accordion filled with soup. One of the kids adopts him as a foot warmer, and they become a unit, inseparable, warm, and occasionally smelly. The goat grows increasingly bitter. She's clearly lost her monopoly on affection and warmth. You wake up one morning to find she's dragged someone's hat into a corner and is quietly chewing on it out of spite. You start adjusting your routine to accommodate the new tenants. The firewood and fuel are moved to the far corner to avoid hoof-related disasters. You lay straw over icy patches of floor to prevent slipping. Someone builds a rough divider from crates to keep the animals contained at night. It doesn't work, but it makes everyone feel better. And while it's chaotic and noisy and smells like a fermented boot factory, there's something undeniably comforting about the presence of the animals. Their bodies radiate a kind of quiet life that helps push back the cold. Their sounds, when not startling, become part of the background, part of the rhythm. When the wind howls outside, you hear it muffled by the heat and breathing inside, and that difference, that insulation of life against death, becomes the most precious thing you have. Food grows scarcer. Rations are measured by the spoon now. You trade with one another quietly, half a crust of bread for an extra shift by the fire, a spoonful of bacon grease offered to the old woman in exchange for a story. You all start to speak less, move slower, but no one stops. The animals give you a strange kind of morale boost. If they can keep living, so can you. One night you find yourself lying in your dirt-dug bed with the goat snoring beside you, a chicken roosting over your head, and the pig wheezing softly from across the room. It's not how you imagined the frontier, not in any possible way. But you feel strangely safe, not comfortable, not happy, but safe. Warmish, fullish, not dying. And these days, that's the bar. You drift off to the sounds of snuffling, rustling, clucking and breathing, a wild, primal symphony that no fireplace could ever match. At some point, probably after your third meal of watered-down bean slop and your 15th night with straw poking through your shirt, you make a decision. You're moving the bed into the kitchen, which in this house means you're dragging your sleeping space all of 4 feet toward the hearth and declaring it the warm zone. It's not official, there's no border. But once you claim it, the others don't argue, because everyone knows sleeping by the fire is the dream. Of course, there's no real kitchen to speak of, just the hearth, a single pot, a few blackened utensils, and the charred circle of floor where everything edible happens. But compared to the rest of the house, it's practically tropical. You can feel the difference in the floorboards, or rather the floor dirt. It's not exactly toasty, but it's warmer than your previous sleeping pit, which had developed a mysterious wet patch and once a worm. So you move, quietly, casually. You drag over your straw, your blankets, your ever-present buffalo robe that now smells like goat breath and ash. You even angle your bedding to face the fire because you're getting fancy now. Luxury, frontier style. Sleeping in the cooking corner means falling asleep to the warm hiss of coals and waking up to the gentle clatter of someone poking the fire. It means the first whiff of morning stew hits your nose before you've even opened your eyes, and it means you're now the proud owner of the warmest bed in the house. It also means you're now the unofficial overnight firekeeper, because if you're closest to it, you're responsible for feeding it, watching it, keeping it from either dying out or burning the entire house down. So while everyone else sleeps like rocks in a pile of wool, you're up at odd hours, half asleep, nudging buffalo chips into the embers with a stick and praying you don't accidentally ignite your bedroll. Historical fact. In many early frontier homes, the hearth served multiple roles: heat source, kitchen, and nighttime survival station. Settlers often moved their bedding into the cooking area during winter months to conserve warmth. This practice was so common that some referred to the fire pit as the winter bedstead. Fringe fact. Some pioneers used a technique called fire banking to keep heat overnight. They would bury live embers under a thick layer of ashes, keeping them alive for hours and ready to reawaken in the morning. Done well, this meant never having to relight a fire from scratch. Done poorly, it meant waking up to a smouldering blanket, or worse. Open debate. There's historical disagreement over whether it was safer to sleep near the hearth or further away. Some records praise the warmth, while others mention burns, smoke inhalation, and tragic accidents. It likely came down to the construction of the home, and whether someone rolled over too enthusiastically in their sleep. So far you've managed not to set yourself on fire, which is good. Though once you did wake up with your blanket smouldering slightly at the edge. You beat it out with your boot and went back to sleep, without telling anyone. That's where your standards are now. Your bed slowly becomes community property. One kid lies across it during the day to warm their feet. Someone else accidentally falls asleep there after fire tending and pretends not to hear the complaints. You don't blame them, you'd fight for it too. It's warm, it's close to the food, and it smells just enough like smoke to hide all the other, worse smells. Of course, there are trade-offs. You now wake up every morning with soot in your eyebrows. Your blankets are permanently grey on one side. The goat has taken to sleeping almost in the hearth, requiring you to gently shove her back by the horns before she sets her tail alight, and you've started coughing, not constantly, just enough to notice. The air in this room, while warmer, is thick, damp, close. Still, you're not moving. The kitchen bed is the throne now. You sit on it during mealtimes. You guard it during fire rotations. Someone suggests drawing a line in the dirt to keep others off. You try. It doesn't work. The pig walks over it like a declaration of war. Cooking while sleeping here is another dance. 1 minute you're dozing, the next you're opening one eye to see someone ladling soup 3 inches from your head. You grunt, roll over, and feel the heat of the pot hovering next to your ear. It's a weird kind of intimacy, sharing both warmth and food in the same cramped space. You've never felt closer to someone than the moment you both reach for the same ladle in the dark. Food from this corner is simple but sacred. Every bite has to count. It's beans, mostly, stretched with bits of salted meat, onion if you're lucky, and sometimes something mysterious that might be old turnip. You don't ask. The pot is never empty, just perpetually low, like hope. But the real beauty of the kitchen bed is this. When everyone else is cold, you're not. You see them curled up tighter, pulling blankets over their heads, shifting positions to chase even a hint of warmth. And while you're not toasty, never toasty, you're at least not frozen. And in this world, that makes you feel like royalty. That night, as you settle into your spot by the hearth, with the faint glow of embers licking the dark and the stew still warm in your stomach, you pull your robe tight and breathe it all in. Smoke, sweat, wood ash, goat, human. Somehow it's become a comforting blend. You close your eyes, one hand resting near the fire stick, ready to wake at the next hiss or pop. You're not just surviving in here anymore, you're living here. There comes a moment in the middle of winter when your body stops craving comfort and starts craving fuel. Not food, fuel. Something hot, dense, greasy, and unapologetically heavy. Something that sticks to your ribs and doesn't let go. And so, one day, after your third helping of flavourless broth and your 100th bean, you find yourself fantasizing about fat. Just pure, sizzling, melt-in-your-mouth fat. Lard, butter, suet. Things you used to wrinkle your nose at back when you had options. Now, you'd punch a bishop for a spoonful. You're not alone. Everyone in the house starts showing signs of what you can only describe as caloric desperation. It's in the way they stir the pot, hoping something thicker will appear. It's in the way they scrape the bottom of the pan with a finger, chasing even the ghost of grease. It's in the way they talk about meals they once had like they're lovers who left in the night. "I remember biscuits with gravy," someone murmurs one morning. "Once had a roast so fatty it dripped off the plate," another says wistfully. You stare into the fire and imagine butter melting over cornbread. You almost cry, so you adapt. The cooking changes. Gone are the thin soups and the watery stews. Now, it's about getting the most warmth per bite. You fry everything in what little fat you've managed to render from scraps. Bacon grease, saved drippings, even a bit of bear lard traded weeks ago and stashed like gold. Bannock cooked in grease, bread crusts soaked in broth and toasted until they sizzle. You don't even pretend it's healthy. It's survival. Historical fact. Pioneers understood the importance of fat in winter survival. High-calorie, fatty meals help the body maintain internal heat, especially when sleeping in cold shelters. Foods like salt pork, suet and grease-fried bread were staples during winter months, and lard was used liberally in cooking when available. Fringe fact. Some pioneers added bacon grease or animal fat to their drinks, literally mixing it into coffee or hot water tea as an extra caloric boost. It sounds horrifying, but when your body's burning through calories just to keep from turning into a popsicle, that fat starts to look like liquid gold. Open debate. There's historical argument over just how sustainable these high-fat diets were during long winters. Some claim it led to illness or digestive trouble, while others argue it was the only reason so many settlers made it through at all. Either way, no one in your sod house is counting grams or reading labels. Even the children start understanding it. They lick the pot after every meal. They hover during cooking, eyes fixed on the ladle, waiting for the moment you scrape the edges of the pan. One of them, the smallest boy, offers to trade his hat for a fried potato slice. You take the hat. He gets the potato. Everyone wins. You eat more than you should when there's something to eat. Not out of greed, but out of fear. A gnawing understanding has settled into your bones. There are fewer sacks in the corner than there used to be. The lard tin is nearly empty. You've started reusing cooking water. You chew slower now, not to savour, but to stretch. But when the food is hot and thick, when it coats your mouth and fills your belly, something inside you quiets. Your body stops, screaming. The cold outside the walls stops scratching quite so loudly. You can lie down on the straw floor, pull your smoke-scented robe around you, and actually rest. That's what the fat is for. It's not indulgent, it's armour. You even find yourself grateful for the dull ache of fullness, because it means you've eaten enough to warm yourself from the inside. You don't dream as violently on those nights. Your fingers don't curl up quite so tight in your sleep. Your nose still freezes a little, but your core holds. One evening, someone suggests a celebration. A fat feast, they call it, using up the last of the rendered grease and flour. It's a reckless idea, but no one stops it. You all pitch in what you've got. A crust of salted meat, a handful of dried berries, a few scraps of fat shaved from a hunk of pork you were saving just in case. The goat even gets excited, bleating as the scent hits the air. And that night, you all eat like kings. It's not elegant, it's not refined, but it's the best thing you've tasted in weeks. Grease drips down your fingers, you mop it up with your last scraps of bread, you chew slowly, letting it linger. There's laughter. Actual laughter. Someone claps their hands, someone hums, the kids lick their bowls. That night, the air inside the sod house feels warm, not just from the fire or the animals or the stone pan glowing red in the hearth, but from what that food gave you. Not just calories, but morale. The sense that, for a moment, you've gotten one over on the cold. You didn't just survive today, you celebrated it, and in this frozen, dirt-walled corner of the world that matters, you curl up by the fire, stomach full, blankets warm. Outside, the wind still screams, but inside, there's peace, for now. The thing about frontier winter is that it doesn't come with a weather report. There's no warning buzzer, no forecast ticker, no kindly mustached man pointing at storm systems on a map. Out here, if you want to know what's coming, you've got two choices. Stare at the sky and guess, or learn how to read the land like it's whispering secrets. You start paying attention, not just in passing, but obsessively. You memorize the colour of the sky before a storm, how it fades from grey to that eerie, metallic blue, like steel dipped in milk. You notice how the air goes still, how the birds vanish, how even the goat gets twitchy. One afternoon, you see a rabbit bolt across the snow like it's late for something, and sure enough, 12 hours later, the wind is back, dragging a wall of snow behind it like a curtain. Nobody tells you this stuff. You pick it up by necessity. You start watching everything. The way the smoke drifts from the fire, the way your breath hangs longer than it did the day before, the feel of the frost under your boots, sharp or soft, thick or brittle. It's like learning a new language with only your life as the textbook. Historical fact: frontier settlers relied heavily on observation and instinct to predict weather. With no access to newspapers, barometers or scientific data, they learned to trust environmental signs, animal behaviour, wind direction, cloud formations and sudden temperature drops as early warnings of approaching blizzards or cold snaps. Fringe fact: some pioneers claim that pain in old injuries, like healed broken bones or scar tissue, acted as natural barometers. A man with an old war wound might swear his knee ached right before a storm. Whether it's true or not, when your neighbour's ankle starts acting up, you start prepping the firewood. Open debate. Scholars still argue how accurate these folk methods were. Some swear by their effectiveness, citing journals and letters filled with precise storm predictions based on wind or cloud movement. Others argue that the methods were vague and often misinterpreted. Still, when you're miles from civilization, it's better to guess with confidence than freeze while waiting for a telegram. One night, you're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. Well, not the ceiling exactly, but the pitch-black darkness above your head. And you notice the silence. Not the cosy kind, but the tight-lipped, holding its breath kind. The fire crackles, the goat shifts, no wind, no snow squeaking outside. You sit up, feel the air on your face and think, something's coming. You nudge the man next to you who grunts and rolls over, muttering about needing another hour. But you get up anyway. You throw on your coat, stiff with frozen sweat and cooking grease, and step outside. The sky's too clear, stars shimmer like frostbite warnings, the moon hangs low and hard-edged, and your nose freezes in under 30 seconds. That's not normal. That's pre-storm stillness. You go back in, shake a few shoulders, and start the routine. Double the firewood, recheck the door seal, pack straw into the wall cracks again. Someone groans. Someone else sits up, blinking. No one argues. They trust you now. You've earned that with every time you called it right, every time you knew to seal the windows an hour before the wind hit. By sunrise, the storm rolls in. You're ready. You've also become somewhat of a wind psychic. You know when a north wind means ice, when an east wind means wet snow, when no wind means it's about to get so cold even your thoughts might shatter. You name the winds, quietly. There's the growler, loud, moaning, the kind that sounds like wolves arguing with the clouds. There's the creeper, quiet at first, then suddenly howling through every crack in your walls. And there's the breaker, the one that slams so hard against the house you wonder if the sod roof will end up in Kansas. You start teaching the kids simple things. See those clouds? That's a long storm, keep your socks dry. If the chickens won't come down from the rafter, stay close to the fire tonight. If the smoke won't, rise, we might be in for trouble. You pass it on like a spell book. There's comfort in it. Predictability. You can't stop the weather, but you can face it on your own terms. You feel it in your joints now too, your hands especially. They go stiff before the cold comes. You've started to think maybe you're developing your own built-in weather system. You even build a small flag system. Scraps of fabric on sticks stuck just outside the door. Red for storm coming, black for firewood emergency, white for too quiet, watch the sky. It's more symbolic than anything, but it helps. It makes you feel less at the mercy of the season, and others start watching too, listening. You've become the unofficial weather reader of your little sodhouse society. Not because you're special, but because you survived long enough to notice the patterns. Of course, you still get it wrong. One afternoon you predict a break in the cold, announce it with some authority, and that night the wind drops 30 degrees. Everyone gives you side eyes and frozen glares. You quietly do double fire duty for 2 days as penance. But when you're right, you get the nods, the good call, the quiet gratitude of people who got to stay warm because you listened to the earth. And that night, as the fire burns low and the wind creeps around the corners, you feel something strange. Confidence. Not comfort, not safety, but a knowledge that you've learned how to listen to the world, that the wind can't sneak up on you anymore, that in a place where weather kills, you've finally learned to speak its language. One morning, when the cold has worn you down to your last thread of patience, and even the goat looks existentially tired, you wake up to silence, not just the usual muffled winter quiet, but something deeper, the kind of hush that fills your ears and makes your heart slow down. You push aside the blanket, sit up and blink into the darkness. No wind, no snow rattling the door, no sounds from outside at all. The air isn't cold, it's still freezing, but there's something different in it. Stillness. You pull on your boots, frozen stiff as always, and crack open the door, just enough to peek outside, and what you see almost knocks the breath out of you. Snow, yes, mountains of it, but everything is so covered, so smooth and untouched, it looks like the whole world has been erased and redrawn. The drifts are up to your waist, the sky's pale and clean, no movement, no tracks, just white stretching out in every direction like the land itself has fallen asleep. You step out and immediately sink, not all the way, just knee-deep, but the snow is dense, packed and sculpted by wind. You look around and realise something. You could dig a shelter right into this. And the idea hits you like a warm slap across the face. Snow is cold, yes, deadly even. But deep snow, when packed just right, can insulate, can protect, can hold warmth better than any wind-battered sod house. That's when it clicks. Tonight, you're going to try something radical. You're going to sleep in the snow. Historical fact. Indigenous peoples, particularly the Inuit and other northern cultures, perfected snow-based shelters like quinzees, simple mounds of snow hollowed out after being packed down and allowed to settle. Unlike ice igloos, these snow shelters were often temporary and built by travellers or during storms. They were surprisingly effective at trapping heat and protecting against wind. Fringe fact. Some early American settlers, when caught in unexpected storms or stranded without shelter, survived by digging into snowbanks and creating temporary snow caves. It wasn't comfortable, but it kept the wind out and held temperatures far above the sub-zero death waiting outside. Open debate. Historians still argue about how often snow shelters were used intentionally by settlers, as opposed to being emergency measures. Some believe knowledge of this technique was passed between indigenous groups and pioneers. Others suggest most settlers feared the snow too much to think of it as a tool. You don't build a proper quinzee, you've never even heard that word. But instinct guides your hands. You dig into the side of a drift near the sod house, just enough to crawl into. You carve out a small dome inside, about the size of a coffin, which is either poetic or deeply unsettling. The snow is heavy but carves like cheese. You work until your fingers sting and your breath fogs the walls into glass. Then you leave it for a few hours, let it settle. That's key. You remember someone, maybe in a trading post once, saying the snow needs time to set. You're not sure what that means, but you do it anyway. By late afternoon, you're crawling back inside with a blanket, a hot stone wrapped in cloth, and your stubborn will to prove that this isn't completely insane. Inside, it's small, tight. You can't sit up, only lie down, but it's quiet, eerily so. The wind outside is muffled, distant, like it's happening in another world. You wiggle down into the trench you carved into the floor, place the hot stone near your stomach, pull the blanket over yourself and close your eyes. And wait. At first, it's like being buried. You feel the weight of snow above you, the way it presses the air down into a soft whisper. But after a while, something incredible happens. You're not freezing. The cold is there, but it's still, stable. No sudden drafts, no breath-stealing gusts. You press your hand to the snow wall beside you, It's hard, yes, but not icy. Your breath rises and clings to the roof like mist. The air smells clean, pure. It's like sleeping inside a frozen lung. You don't fall asleep, not really. You drift, hover, float in a place between dreams and silence. And when you finally crawl out hours later, blinking into the twilight, your limbs are stiff but not frozen. Your breath fogs, the air, and you feel something strange in your chest. Accomplishment. It worked. When you tell the others, they look at you like you've officially cracked. You slept in the snow, someone repeats, blinking slowly. You nod, explain, gesture. Some shake their heads, some smirk. But one of the older men, quiet, grizzled, missing half a beard, nods slowly and says, "Used to do that when I was trapping in Montana. Better than freezing your ears off in the wind." And just like that, your snow shelter becomes a frontier novelty. Not everyone wants to try it, but a few do. You help dig another, a little larger, lined with fir branches and a layer of wool. 2 of the kids beg to sleep in it, claiming it's an adventure. You let them. They come back in the morning red-nosed and thrilled. It was like a cave, they shout, like a fort. Soon you've got 3 snow shelters dug into the bank behind the house. You call it the Snow Village, and someone makes a little sign out of a charred stick and hangs it above the largest entrance. You all pretend it's ridiculous, but every night someone volunteers to sleep out there, because now, for the first time in weeks, you have options. And out here, when death rides in on the wind and the firewood runs low, having options feels like the first breath of spring. By now, you've made peace with the smoke. Not in a poetic, spiritual way. No, more like that worn-down surrender you give to a stubborn stain or a snoring roommate. It's just part of life now. Your clothes reek of it. Your hair smells like a fire pit. You wake up with a throat that feels like you gargled ashes. But the real kicker, you still don't have a fireplace. Not a real one anyway. No chimney, no flue. Just a hole in the ceiling that pulls some of the smoke out when the wind's being generous, which it usually isn't. So you start to get clever. Not brilliant, not revolutionary. Just clever enough to avoid slowly choking out your entire family with each meal. Because now the fire isn't just for warmth, it's for cooking. Always has been. But without a chimney, every time you light it up, you're rolling the dice between hot stew and accidental smokehouse of doom. You begin experimenting, shifting the fire from the centre of the room to the far corner under the makeshift vent. You stack rocks behind it to reflect heat toward your bed. Someone suggests digging a shallow trench in the floor, running from the fire to the door to funnel out smoke. You try it. The house now has a fire moat. It helps, a little. Mostly it gives the goat something new to trip over. You try cooking over embers instead of open flames. More control, less smoke. You try raising the pan on stones, letting air flow underneath. You even try burning only certain kinds of fuel. Dried grass, buffalo chips, carefully selected wood knots. The result is inconsistent, but you start noticing patterns. Pine smoke is worse than oak. Wet wood is a death sentence. Buffalo chips are surprisingly clean burning if you don't mind the smell, which by this point you absolutely don't. Historical fact. Many early prairie homes, especially sod houses and dugouts, were built without chimneys due to a lack of materials or the rush to build shelter before winter. Settlers often cooked on open hearths inside these homes, venting smoke through makeshift holes in the roof, and lived with the choking consequences daily. Fringe fact. Some frontier families constructed chimney substitutes, a vertical stack of mud-plastered barrels, crates, or even woven baskets lined with clay to vent smoke. These mud chimneys were prone to collapsing, freezing, or just not working at all. Others skipped the structure altogether and lived with black ceilings and lungs full of soot. Open debate. There's contention over whether settlers genuinely adapted to the smoke or just endured it. Some journals describe families coughing constantly, developing chronic respiratory issues, and eventually abandoning homes for better ventilated ones. Others insist it was just part of life, like lice or sour bread. You also try the cold cook method. Not raw exactly, but using retained heat. Boil water, cook beans, then wrap the pot in a blanket and let it finish slowly while you sleep. It works sometimes. Other times, you wake up to a half-done mush that smells like regret. But it's progress. You dream of a chimney, You fantasize about one the way people dream of Paris. A proper hearth with stones, a flue, smoke rising in a graceful column. You once saw a chimney like that in a photo back east. It had bricks and everything. A luxury, a miracle. Out here, a chimney is a castle. One evening you make a breakthrough, or maybe just a mistake that happens to work. You build a low fire, almost a trench of coals, lined with rocks, and place the cooking pan on top of a flat slate. You create a sort of shallow open oven, insulating it with more stones behind and around. The smoke rises slower. The heat focuses inward, and suddenly you're not choking on every breath. The stew even tastes better, like hope. Others catch on. The house becomes a tinker zone, a sort of low-tech laboratory of heat and desperation. One guy builds a windshield out of broken crates and hangs it near the fire to redirect the draft. Another woman makes a clay-sealed cone out of mud and cloth, kind of a proto-chimney. It lasts 3 days before collapsing. Still, spirits are high, everyone's trying, everyone's adapting. You start tracking your cough. On smoky days it's deeper, on good fire days it's lighter. You keep a little scratch on the wall, just a line for each day without throat pain. It's a sad, hopeful little calendar. The smoke also changes your relationship with the space. You start sitting lower to the ground, where the air is clearer. You nap with your head under blankets, not just for warmth, but for breathable air. You teach the children to test the wind before lighting anything. If it blows from the north, you keep the fire low. If from the west, you might even skip cooking and chew hardtack like a soldier. Some nights, when the wind turns just right and the fire behaves, the smoke actually escapes cleanly. You can see the stars through the vent, you can breathe without coughing, you feel like you've beaten the house at its own game, and some nights, it's worse. You wake up hacking, eyes burning, the walls sweating black soot. The fire refuses to behave, the smoke clings to your skin like oil. You open the door and let in the freezing air just for the sweet, sweet taste of oxygen. But you endure. You always endure. You go to sleep that night with a pan of beans bubbling over a low-controlled fire. You've used just the right mix of dry fuel. The vent is open. The smoke rises slow and clean. You watch it swirl into the night and feel something close to pride. You haven't mastered fire, not yet, but you've learned to negotiate with it. And in a house without a fireplace, that's the next best thing. Somewhere in the middle of another endless night, with the fire down to its sullen orange bones and the wind licking the walls like it knows you're almost out of buffalo chips, you realise something unsettling. You're afraid of the dark again. Not the dark itself exactly, but the kind of dark that's so thick it feels alive, like it's sitting on your chest, breathing in time with your own breath. You can't see anything, not the rafters, not your hand, not even the goat who's somewhere nearby, hopefully not chewing your only extra sock. Most nights now, there's no light left to spare. The candles are gone, burned down to nubs or melted into small waxy regrets. The last stub of tallow you were saving fell into the stew pot 2 nights ago, and no one had the heart to scoop it out. So now, when the fire dies and the embers go dim, the darkness takes over fully. It's not just something outside the windows, it's inside the house, inside your blankets, inside your head. You lie there in the pitch black, curled under your layers, and try not to listen too hard to what's happening outside. There's always something. A thump, a scrape, a crunch of snow. You tell yourself it's wind, or ice falling from the roof, or a branch, except you haven't seen a tree in 20 miles. So what branch exactly? Historical fact. In the absence of artificial light, pioneers spent long hours in total darkness during the winter months. Once the fire was out and the sun gone, there were no lanterns unless you had fuel, no candles unless you made or traded for them. Some families saved slivers of fat to use as makeshift lamps, but for many the night was simply endured with patience and fear. Fringe fact. There are scattered accounts of early settlers keeping a night watch, not for fires or predators, but for the dark itself. Some believed in spirits or strange creatures that travelled with the wind, entering homes through cracks and holes, stealing warmth, or worse. Superstition? Sure. But when you've been snowed in for weeks and something scratches the outside wall, a little fear feels very reasonable. Open debate. Some historians downplay the role of psychological stress in winter survival, focusing on the physical toll, starvation, frostbite, illness. Others argue the mental effects of darkness, isolation and long nights played a far greater role than we acknowledge. Cabin fever wasn't just a phrase, it was a slow, creeping unravelling. That's what you start to feel now, the unravelling. Sleep doesn't come easily, not because of noise or cold, but because of the long silence. The way your mind fills in the gaps, you start imagining footsteps, faces in the rafters, whispers behind the door. You know it's nothing, you're not a child, but try telling that to your brain when the house is black, and the only warmth left is your own body heat pressed under 4 layers of wool, hay, and desperation. You lie still, counting your heartbeats, watching for the faintest flicker from the hearth. The others are asleep, breathing softly, bundled close. Even Gertrude is quiet. You envy her. She doesn't worry about the dark. She doesn't sit here imagining something slithering across the frozen floor. Eventually you start taking turns. Not officially, not even allowed, but you and a few others begin staying awake in shifts. One person keeps an eye on the fire, one listens, one just sits, watching the shadows that aren't really there. It's not about guarding against anything real. It's about having someone awake when the dark gets too heavy. You take your shift gladly. It gives you something to do. You wrap yourself in your buffalo robe, sit beside the glowing stone pan and listen. The wind hisses across the roof, soft and steady. Every now and then the snow on the ceiling shifts, making a dull thump that sounds way too much like footsteps. But nothing happens. No monster comes. No frost demon breaks in through the wall. Still, your mind wanders. To stories. To home. To whatever version of peace used to exist. And that's when you start talking. Softly. Just words. To no one. Or maybe to the dark. Maybe to the house itself. You tell it what you remember. What you miss. The name of the girl who lived next door back east. The way your mother used to bake bread that smelled like warm heaven. At first, you think you're crazy. But then someone else does it too. The next night during their shift you hear them murmuring. Not loud enough to interrupt. Just enough to know you're not alone in your strange new ritual. You don't ask what they said. They don't ask you. It's private. Sacred, almost. It becomes a thing. The night watch starts whispering stories into the dark, passing the time with memory instead of fear. The kids even join in, sometimes quietly telling tales about flying goats and walking snowmen. One of the women swears she once saw a light out in the field that wasn't the moon. She won't explain, and no one asks. Some things are better left mysterious. You make a rule, unspoken but ironclad. No lying on the night shift. If you say you saw something, you believe it. If you heard a voice, it happened. This is how you survive the dark, not by ignoring it, but by respecting it. Like the wind, like the cold, like the house that somehow kept you alive through another week. Eventually the fire dies too low to see. The room turns black again. You lie down, still warm from your watch, and pull the blankets over your head. The silence is back, but this time it's gentler. You're not alone. Someone else is awake now, whispering to the dark, and for once, you don't mind not sleeping. There's a kind of dignity you lose in winter, slowly, in layers, the same way you lose feeling in your fingers. One day you're folding your socks and shaking out your coat to keep it neat, and the next you're wearing everything you own at once, sleeping in a straw nest with your boots on, and stepping over a pig to pee in a metal pot that may or may not be frozen shut. You've reached the part of survival where hygiene is a rumour and fashion is a joke. The truth is, you're a walking scarecrow now. A patchwork of wool, fur, burlap and other people's cast-offs. You've got at least 3 shirts on, 2 of them holey, one that smells suspiciously like soup. Pants, layered, socks, mismatched and stiff. You wear everything you can, not for style, but for survival. You could be carrying spare nails in the folds of your coat and not even notice. There's no undressing anymore, not really, just loosening. You peel back a layer here, lift a hem there, but mostly you just marinate. You sleep in your coat, you cook in your coat, you've probably developed coat-based muscles. The only time you remove it fully is when you think no one's looking, and even then, only for a few minutes and only near the fire. Historical fact. Layering was essential to pioneer winter survival. Settlers often wore several shirts, petticoats or trousers at once, sometimes so stiff with frost they could stand up on their own. Wool was preferred, and furs, especially rabbit, beaver or buffalo, were prized for outerwear. Washing was rare in deep winter. Garments were often worn continuously for weeks. Fringe fact. Some pioneers repurposed everything: blanket scraps as scarves, flour sacks as shirts, even pages from books or wallpaper as extra insulation. There's at least one account of someone lining their boots with dried grass, which, in fairness, is probably more comfortable than whatever's happening inside your current pair. Open debate. There's still discussion among historians about how bad hygiene actually got in frontier winters. Some letters and journals mention baths taken in freezing water or snow, while others paint a more realistic picture. Dirt, grease, sweat, and wool mashed together into something between a person and a fireplace. You don't smell great. Let's just acknowledge that. No one does. The house smells like survival. Sweat, smoke, cooked beans, and damp hay, with a lovely note of wet goat musk on top. But after a while, you stop noticing, or maybe you adapt. Your nose, in self-defense, just stops caring. You only really register it when someone comes in from outside smelling like cold and clean air, and suddenly you remember there's a whole scent spectrum beyond slightly on fire. Washing is complicated. Water has to be melted first, then heated, then carried across the room, sloshing and steaming. You get just enough to wipe your hands, maybe splash your face. A full body scrub? That's fantasy. The closest you've come is once accidentally falling through the roof of the snow shelter and landing face first in powder. Honestly, it helped. You dream of a bath. Not even a hot one, just warm. You dream of removing all your layers, of clean cotton, of air that doesn't cling to you. You remember soap. You almost cry. And yet you've found systems, workarounds, tricks. You hang your socks over the fire every night, rotating them like roast meat. You turn your shirts inside out every few days so the crust forms evenly. Yes, that's a real sentence now. You've turned an old pot lid into a kind of hairbrush/helmet. Your scalp is a battlefield of soot and static, but at least the hair's still attached. You keep the same scarf wrapped around your face most of the time. It's your barrier against the cold, the wind, the world. It smells like everything you've eaten this month and might be made entirely of lint by now, but it keeps your nose from freezing off. At one point, someone suggests doing laundry. Real laundry. There's a moment of silence, then laughter, then coughing. Then someone quietly mutters, maybe in spring, and you all move on. The kids, oddly, seem least bothered. They wear their grime like a badge. One girl has taken to rubbing ash on her cheeks, for war paint. One boy has a patch of pants so stiff with mud it crackles when he moves. You're past correcting them. You're too busy trying to keep your own knees from cracking when you squat. The goat, for what it's worth, is the cleanest thing in the room. She grooms herself fastidiously, picks at her hooves with surprising delicacy, and somehow always looks mildly offended by your general condition. If she weren't also your space heater, you might be more insulted. But there's one upside to it all. You're never cold. Not really. All those layers, all that trapped body heat, it works. Sure, you can't bend at the waist without dislocating something, but your core stays warm. Your toes, when triple-socked and wrapped in sheepskin and stuffed into boots lined with grass, no longer resemble small frozen tombstones. You've become insulation, a living, breathing furnace wrapped in cloth and grit and memories of what it felt like to be clean. And honestly, you've never been more functional. And that's the part that hits you the hardest. How adaptable the human body is. How quickly the brain rewrites what's normal. How easily you've traded hygiene for heat, vanity for survival. How you've become this person. Grubby, layered, practical, and alive. You lie down that night in your filth-covered clothes, your scarf around your nose, your fingers curled into the folds of your coat. You stink. You itch. You're slightly crusty, but you are warm. And for now, that's everything. You've reached a point where every little thing that works, every trick, every hack, every borrowed idea feels like striking gold. You're not just surviving the cold now, you're building a repertoire, a collection of passed-down wisdom, stolen strategies, and sheer desperation-fueled ingenuity. But if you want to know who really knew how to handle the cold, like mastered it, like could sleep outside in a fur coat and still feel smug about it, it wasn't the pioneers, it was the fur traders. They were here long before your kind showed up with your canvas tents and your this'll-be-fine attitude. Trappers, voyageurs, mountain men, grimy, grizzled and oddly poetic types who made homes out of snowbanks and meals out of raccoon. You'd heard stories about them back east, but now, Huddled in your hay-lined dirt house with 10 other coughing humans and a goat, you start to wonder what they knew that you didn't. So you start listening when people talk, when someone mentions an uncle who trapped beavers for the Hudson's Bay Company, when an old man mutters about wearing fur the right way. You ask questions without making it obvious. You learn by watching, and slowly the knowledge trickles in. First, furs are everything. Not just for warmth, but for how you wear them. It turns out you've been doing it wrong. Wool inside, fur outside. No. The real Cold Warriors flipped it. Fur side in. Fur against the skin, hide to the wind. That's how you trap heat. That's how you survive the kind of cold that doesn't just sting, it judges you. Historical fact. Fur traders and indigenous peoples alike often wore fur garments with the pelt facing inward to preserve body heat more efficiently. While outerwear today often displays fur for aesthetics, back then it was all about functionality. Moose hide, beaver pelts, raccoon, wolf, and of course buffalo. Each had their own purpose and placement. Fringe fact. Some trappers would sleep completely wrapped in furs and nestled into a pile of snow, using the heat of their own breath trapped inside to stay warm. Others slept with their dogs for heat, often under shared blankets of animal hides. If you ever wondered how someone could nap through a blizzard, that's your answer. Fur, dog, snow, in that order. Open debate. There's argument over whether fur traders had better winter survival rates than settlers. Some say their skills kept them alive longer, others argue they took more risks, travelled alone, and often died younger. Still, when it comes to cold endurance, few are better prepared, or less bothered, than the fur trade veterans. So now you start adjusting. You fashion a crude fur vest from scraps of rabbit and some ruined gloves. Not pretty, definitely lumpy. But when you wear it inside your coat, the heat clings to you like a second skin. You finally understand why the trappers looked so smug in those daguerreotypes. They were sweating. You copy other tricks too. Someone teaches you to warm your boots with hot stones before you put them on, not after. You learn to sleep with your feet slightly elevated to avoid frostbite pooling in your toes. You pack your mittens with dry moss. You line the inside of your coat collar with beaver fur and suddenly the wind feels less personal. But the real treasure, the game changer, is the blanket trade. One of the older settlers in the group, a wiry woman with a limp and eyes like a hawk, unpacks a point blanket from her old trunk. Heavy, cream-coloured, stripes of red, yellow, green, and indigo. She handles it like it's sacred. It was traded from a trapper who got it from the Hudson's Bay Company, back when people still called Canada the Northwest. It weighs about as much as the goat. You try it one night and sleep so well you nearly miss morning fire duty. The weight presses out the panic. The wool traps every ounce of body heat like it's hoarding it for spring. You consider stealing it. You don't. Barely. From that point on, you start to see your sod house not just as a shelter, but as a crude fur post, a place where knowledge and warmth are traded in equal measure. The stories start flowing. One man swears by lining his boots with porcupine quills, not for warmth, but to keep mice out. Someone else insists on chewing pine needles to keep the cold out of your lungs. You're not sure it works, but you try it. Your mouth tastes like forest regret for 3 days. You learn to keep dry snow out of the house. Fur traders hated wet socks more than bears, so now you stomp off the powder at the door, scrape your boots with a knife, and hang your mittens near the ceiling to dry. You even try sleeping on spruce boughs once, layered over the straw. Smells great, pokes you like betrayal. But hey, it's what the voyagers did. You start to wonder if you've somehow absorbed them. These ghostly men in fur coats who once passed through these same plains, their methods, their grit, their stubborn refusal to die of exposure. There's something elegant in how simple it all is. Fur, fire, shelter, food, repeat. It strips life down to something raw and honest. One night, after building your bed into a proper fur-lined nest with heated rocks and a buffalo robe, you lie back and think. They'd be proud of this. Not because it's neat or clean. It's not. Not because it's comfortable. It definitely isn't. But because it works. You're not just living through winter now. You're living like they did. You fall asleep with fur at your back and wool at your feet, warm from the fire and from the knowledge that the people who came before you didn't just survive this, they taught you how. And now, you get to pass it on. There's a story passed around in a low whisper on nights when the fire burns low and the wind sounds just a little too human. It usually starts the same way. A man sleeping alone in his cabin during a cold snap. Fire barely alive, when something makes him stir. Some instinct, some feeling, and he wakes up just in time to grab his axe from under the bed. Outside there's a scratching at the door, or the window, or maybe it's inside already. The details shift, like snowdrifts, but the axe is always there. That's the whole point. You sleep by your axe, just in case. At first you think it's a superstition, another half-frozen folktale told to stir up drama and keep kids scared enough to stay near the fire. But then someone, you forget who, says it again after you hear a very real scratching sound against the outer wall one night, and suddenly the story feels less like fiction and more like a weather warning. So now, like everyone else in the house, you sleep with your axe, or at least near enough to grab. It leans against the straw pile you call a bed, cold and dull and weirdly comforting. You don't even use it much. Most of the chopping was done before the snow buried everything deeper than a man's shoulders. But its presence feels necessary. It's not about defence. Not really. It's about being ready. For anything. Historical fact. Many frontier families kept a weapon or tool within arm's reach during the night, especially in isolated areas. Not just for predators or strangers, but for fire emergencies, frozen doors, or even collapsing roofs under snow. An axe wasn't just for wood. It was your emergency exit, your protection, your can opener for the apocalypse. Fringe fact, some settler journals mentioned sleeping with the axe inside the bedroll, wrapped in cloth to keep it from freezing to the touch. One entry, half legible and scrawled during what was probably a full blizzard, simply reads, "Sleep by the axe, the wind walks tonight." You think about that sentence a little too much. Open debate. Some historians argue that sleeping by the axe was more symbolic than practical, a sort of talismanic gesture against fear and helplessness. Others insist it was a brutally practical move. If your door froze shut or your chimney caught fire, you didn't have time to go looking for your tools, you needed to grab and act, or die. You don't think anything's coming for you in the night. Not really. You haven't seen a wolf since October, and most of the scavengers are either hibernating or smarter than you when it comes to winter strategy. But still, the axe is there. On the nights when the wind moans like it's working through grief. On the nights when the ice on the ceiling cracks just loud enough to jolt you awake. One night you actually do need it. Sort of. You wake to the sound of crashing, snow slamming off the roof probably, but loud, hard. The sod house shudders like it's exhaling wrong. You sit up. The kids whimper. The goat panics and steps on someone's blanket. You grab the axe without even thinking. It turns out to be nothing more than a snowslide. The packed drifts on the roof finally giving in to their own weight. But your heart doesn't get the message right away. It pounds like it's preparing to run. Your fingers tighten around the axe handle. Later, when the fire's built back up and everyone's settled again, someone asks if you really thought you were going to fight off a snowdrift with a hatchet. You don't answer, because maybe you weren't. Maybe you were going to cut a way out, or cut a way in, or maybe you didn't know. Maybe that's just what people do now, hold on to something sharp in the dark and pray it's enough. It becomes ritual. Every night before sleep you check the axe. Make sure it's there, blade tucked under the edge of the robe, handle where your hand naturally falls. It's not for show, not even for real use. It's for readiness. That's the word that matters. Because out here, readiness is what separates the people who wake up in the morning from the ones who don't. And it's not just you. The others have their versions. A knife under the bedroll, a poker stick by the fire, a sharpened shovel leaned quietly in the corner. None of you talk about it directly, but you all know. It's the unspoken pact. If something happens, we act fast. Whether it's wolves or snow or a fire sparked by a shifting stone, you're not going down with your boots off. It's funny. The axe isn't even sharp anymore. You haven't had a whetstone since November. The edge is dull, nicked from too much frozen wood. But it doesn't matter. It's not about how well it cuts. It's about what it means. A symbol. A handle to grab when everything else slips away. There's a kind of peace in it too. You fall asleep faster now, knowing you're ready. That if the dark pushes in, if the wind tears through the door, if the snow decides to fall all at once, you won't be caught helpless. Not completely. That night, you lie down with your axe under your arm like a promise. The fire is low, the goat snores, the house creaks, and outside the wind sighs like it's given up for now. But you haven't. You've still got your axe. Winter has a way of making time go sideways. The days blur into each other like wet ink, and the only real markers are meals and the slow burn of the firewood pile getting smaller. You stop counting dates. Nobody cares if it's Tuesday or Friday. There are only 2 times now, before dark and after dark. That's how you divide your life. And lately you've started marking the days not by the calendar, but by the sounds. Today is a drip day, just a single one. You hear it early in the morning lying in your bedroll near the fire, half asleep and dreaming about biscuits. At first you think it's part of the dream, but then it comes again. Drip. Not a pipe, not a footstep, not wind. Water. Real, honest, melting water. Somewhere, somehow, something has thawed just enough for a drop to fall. You sit up like someone lit a match under your ribs. You're not the only one who hears it. The others stir too. It's subtle, but heads lift. Someone squints at the ceiling. A child whispers, "Did it rain?" The goat looks up as if confirming, yes, the world is changing. Historical fact. During the deepest part of winter, even a 1 or 2 degree rise in temperature could produce noticeable thawing inside sod homes or dugouts. Ice would melt from eaves or ceiling crevices, causing early drips, often falsely interpreted as the start of spring. But it wasn't. Not yet. Fringe fact, some settlers kept jars or tin cups beneath known drip points inside their homes, small symbolic attempts at collecting the first water of the season. In some households, drinking from the first melt was considered lucky. Others saved it for washing, claiming it cleaned better than snowmelt. Superstition? Maybe. But after months of freezing, any sign of flow felt sacred. Open debate. Some historians believe these early melt signals were psychological more than practical, that settlers clung to drips and slush as emotional lifelines, tiny promises of warmth in a world still ruled by ice. Others argue these signs genuinely helped predict breakups in the snowpack, or when it was safe to begin moving supplies again. You know it's not spring. Not really. Not yet. You've seen enough false thaws to recognise this for what it is. A tease. The snow's not gone, the wind hasn't packed its bags, but still, something shifted. The air feels a hair lighter. The smoke from the fire curls up a little higher before flattening out. And when you open the door to throw out a pan of slop, the wind slaps your face instead of stabbing it. That's progress. The drip becomes a kind of companion. It's steady, predictable. Every few seconds, plink. It echoes off the pan you've set under it, a tiny song of almost spring. It drives some people crazy. One guy threatens to smash the pan with a spoon, but secretly you think everyone loves it. No one moves the pan. You start checking outside more often. Not for danger, but for signs. The snowbanks have crusted over. You can walk across them now without sinking, your boots crunching instead of disappearing. The roof doesn't creak as much under its load, and one afternoon, out by the goat pen, you notice a patch of bare earth near the south wall of the house. It's no bigger than your hand, but it's there. Brown. Real. It smells like dirt. You kneel and touch it. It's gritty, frozen, clumped. But beneath it, softness. Mud. You press your palm to it like a long-lost friend. You don't say anything about it to the others. Not yet. You don't want to jinx it, but you keep visiting it. Like a shrine. One day you find that someone's left a stick of straw there, arranged like an offering. You don't ask who. You just nod. Back inside, the air is still cold. Your breath still fogs. But the house feels looser. Less like a tomb, more like a waiting room. You start to hear the walls settling, melting ice dripping inside the sod layers. It's almost like the house itself is breathing again, stretching its ribs, getting ready. That night you don't even wear your full coat to bed, just a blanket and your vest. You wake up once sweating, not from fever but from actual warmth. The air isn't toasty by any means, but it doesn't punch you in the lungs like it used to. It only taps now. There's danger in this though. You know it. The false hope. The fake spring. This is the season of traps. A few warm days, and then the blizzards come back even harder. It's a pattern you've learned to expect, like the way the fire always burns lowest right before morning. This warmth is a gift, but it has teeth. Still, it gives you permission to move, to plan. You start digging out the shed, you check your remaining supplies, you lay your gear out in the sun, just for a few minutes, to air it out. And the smell, well, it's not great, but it's fresh, not frozen, and that's enough. You start sleeping lighter, waking up earlier, your joints feel less stiff, you even crack a joke at breakfast, a real one, with a smile and everything. Someone throws a crust of bread at you, it's almost fun, and through it all the drip continues, sometimes 2 now, sometimes 3. You're not sure what you'll do when it stops. Will that mean the melt is over? Or that the snow is truly giving up? Either way, the sound of water falling by itself, unaided, natural, unfrozen, feels like a kind of hymn, a frontier lullaby, the kind that makes you believe, even for one more night, that this won't last forever. So you lie down, listening to it, one drip at a time, waiting for the flood. You wake up and something's wrong. Not just the usual "it's freezing and I might have drooled into my blanket again" wrong, but a deep, tight wrongness that hangs in the air like smoke. Nobody's moving, no coughs, no clatter of boots or groans from stiff joints, not even the goat's familiar wheeze. It's that awful silence again, but heavier than before, and when you sit up blinking through the dim light of the still glowing embers, you notice something out of place. Someone still lying down. Too still. It's Elias, the corner bed, closest to the door. You know, the one you always hated drawing lots. For during the first storm back in December, too much draft, too little fire. You all rotated beds for weeks to keep it fair, until people started quietly not drawing lots anymore, finding reasons to stay just one more night in the warmer spots. Eventually Elias stopped trading. He just shrugged and said, "I don't mind the cold," with that quiet, stubborn look he always had. You pull your coat tighter and crawl over. Something about the way he's lying sends a knot down your spine. Not peaceful, not like sleep, more like stiff. You whisper his name once, then louder. No response. You touch his shoulder. Frozen. Not his whole body, just the surface. His hair is stiff with ice, his blanket crusted with frost. His skin, pale and waxy, sinks under your fingers like cold dough. You feel your stomach drop into your boots. Elias didn't make it. Historical fact. Death by cold exposure wasn't always dramatic. Many settlers died in their sleep from hypothermia during winter nights, especially when sleeping near walls or drafty entrances. The body simply cooled, breathing slowed, and then stopped, often without the person ever waking. Fringe fact. There are accounts of settlers mistaking deep sleep or cold-induced comas for death, sometimes burying people prematurely. One eerie folk tale tells of a man who rose from the grave after his coffin was dug out in a thaw, very much alive. True or not, the line between sleep and death in these temperatures was often terrifyingly thin. Open debate. Scholars still discuss whether settlers truly understood hypothermia in the way we do today. Some journals describe cold deaths as if they were peaceful fade-outs. Others reference strange behaviours, stripping off clothing, disorientation, laughing, classic late-stage hypothermia signs we now recognise, but they didn't. Whether Elias felt it coming, you'll never know. The house goes quiet as word spreads. A low murmur, a few muffled gasps, someone sobbing softly into their scarf. No one moves toward the body at first, not because they don't care, but because they do, and they're terrified that touching him will make it real. You sit there a while, staring at his face. It looks gentle, almost. His lips slightly parted, like he'd just taken a breath and forgotten the next one. His hands are folded awkwardly, like he curled up against the cold but never uncurled. There's a part of you that wants to check again, to wait, just in case. But you know. Eventually the oldest man, Walter, who's seen more winters than most, pulls a blanket over Elias's face. No ceremony, no prayers, just that simple motion. The final one. No one eats much that morning. You stir the beans out of habit, but no one reaches for a bowl. The fire burns hot, too hot, like you're trying to undo what happened by sheer force. No one speaks louder than a whisper. You all keep glancing at the corner like it might change, like maybe the world made a mistake. But the worst part? It didn't feel surprising. You knew this could happen. You all did. You'd heard the coughing fits, seen the frost on the walls, watched the supplies dwindle. Still, You convinced yourselves that if you just rotated beds, packed the walls, shared stew, told stories, you could keep everyone alive. Now that illusion has a hole in it. A cold, human-shaped hole in the corner of the room. You have to do something with the body. You can't just leave him there, but the ground outside is still too hard to dig. The snow's thick and the earth beneath it is iron. You've heard of people burying their dead in snowbanks until the thaw. Others built crude boxes and kept them near the house, which you can't even imagine doing. The thought of keeping alive as like stored firewood makes your chest hurt. So you choose the snowbank. A few of you go out, pick a drift near the tree line, and carve into it like a soft tomb. The work is quiet. No one says much. One person throws up behind the shed, then comes back and keeps digging. You bring Elias out wrapped in a wool blanket. His good one, the one with the red stitching. You lay him down gently, place a cross of sticks above him, and walk away. No eulogies, just a slow line of boots shuffling back to the house. That night, you all sleep a little closer together. Not for warmth, though that helps, but because you suddenly remember how fragile everyone is. How close the line is between just cold and never waking up again. No one volunteers for the corner bed, so you leave it empty. A quiet spot in the straw where the cold settles and the wind hums through the cracks, and somehow you still have to sleep. You lie there, heart heavy, staring at the ceiling. Every creak sounds like a whisper. Every gust outside feels like a memory trying to get back in. You keep thinking about Elias, how he never complained, how he always took the worst bed without a word, how maybe, just maybe, you all let that become too easy. There's a different kind of silence now, not the kind that frightens, the kind that mourns. The next morning you wake up and someone's put a tin cup out on the snowbank, just beside the little cross. It catches the drip of meltwater, one drop at a time. Maybe that's a prayer, maybe it's all you've got. It comes suddenly like a crack in a frozen window, loud, jarring and unmistakably real. A sharp creak from the roof, a hollow boom in the distance, then the unmistakable snap of ice giving up. You sit up in your bedroll, confused, half asleep, and halfway into the worst dream you've had in weeks. But this isn't a dream. The house is shifting. Something is changing. Someone else bolts upright. Did you hear that? Yes. Everyone heard it. A sound like the land itself groaning, tired of holding winter on its back. You pull on your boots, still stiff, still lined with regret, and step outside, breath clouding in the air. It's morning, just barely, and the sky is that soft pewter colour that means anything could happen. A blizzard, a thaw, the collapse of the world. But then you look down past the snowbanks, and you see it. Water. Real, moving, dirty brown water, slushing its way down a shallow gully near the goat pen. The thaw has begun. Historical fact. The end of prairie winter, often called break-up season, was not a graceful transition. Melting snow combined with frozen ground to create rivers of slush, mud, and floodwater. Dugouts filled, sod roofs collapsed, and roads became impassable. It was a messy, dangerous shift that destroyed as often as it delivered relief. Fringe fact. Some pioneers celebrated the thaw not with food or drink. They rarely had much left, but by burning the worst of their winter clothes. A pair of socks gone too stiff. A jacket that had become more smoke than fabric. These odd little burnings were part catharsis, part ritual, part bonfire party. Open debate. While the spring thaw symbolised freedom from the cold, historians debate whether it was truly a relief or just a new kind of hell. With mudslides, flooding, collapsing structures, and sickness from rotten exposure, some settlers actually feared the thaw more than the snow. You step carefully into the mush. Your boots squish. A thin crust of ice snaps underfoot. The ground, which was solid for months, is now trying to become liquid. It smells like earth, like mould, like damp life crawling out of its winter grave. The goat slips twice and screams like she's being murdered. You help her up. She's offended. But the snow is shrinking fast, and the whole yard looks like someone dumped a bowl of porridge across it. Inside, the walls are starting to bleed. That's what it looks like. Slow, dark lines forming in the sod, leaking down as ice trapped for months begins to melt. Your floor turns spongy. You press a hand to the wall, and it squishes like a soaked sponge. Not ideal. One of the roof beams lets out a loud groan around midday. Just wood swelling, probably. You hope. Everyone gives it a wary glance, then returns to whatever they were doing. Patching boots, boiling last week's stew, watching water drip off the firewood pile. And then the smell comes. Oh, right. You forgot about that part. Thaw rot. Everything that froze inside the house, all winter long, all the spilled broth, all the goat droppings, all the half-buried straw and dirt and human living, now begins to ferment. Slowly. Powerfully. The floor smells like compost. The walls smell like mushrooms. The back corner, where someone once spilled a whole pot of greasy soup, now smells like a cursed stew pit from which no soul escapes. It's unbearable. It's hilarious. Someone actually gags. Someone else suggests setting the house on fire just for the air. You all laugh. Kind of. You try airing things out, but the windows, such as they are still frozen shut with ice that refuses to leave. So you chip away, 1 inch at a time, using the back of a spoon and a lot of profanity. By sunset, one of the windows finally opens. Air rushes in, cold but fresh. It's the first time in months you've felt wind on your face inside the house. You breathe in like it's medicine. The water gets worse before it gets better. The paths between buildings, if you can call them that, become ankle-deep soup. You lay boards down, try to keep the goat from drowning in the yard, and use whatever dry straw is left to soak up the worst puddles. It's pointless, but it feels like doing something. The gravesite, where Elias lies in the snowbank, begins to melt as well. You avoid looking at it too long, not out of disrespect, but because the thaw makes everything feel too exposed. The snow that once felt like a soft curtain now turns traitor, revealing everything it hid. One of the kids asks if you'll rebury him properly once the ground softens. You nod. You will. You owe him that much. There's no celebrating yet. You're still too dirty, too tired, too surrounded by wet misery, but there's something underneath it all, a kind of breathless relief you haven't let yourself feel in months. You catch someone humming. You hear a giggle from the kids. You see a woman washing her face with actual water, cold, muddy, but water. And you realise something remarkable. No one died last night. That fact alone is enough to bring someone to tears. And it does. Quietly, behind the house, out of sight. That night the house is warmer, but you still sleep wrapped tight in every blanket you own. Habit, fear, memory. You listen to the drip, drip, drip from the ceiling, and now it's not a hopeful sound. It's an urgent one. You need to patch everything. You need to dig drainage. You need to move firewood before it becomes soup. But all of that can wait until morning. Tonight, the world isn't trying to kill you, just inconvenience you, and that somehow feels like the kindest thing it's done in months. The snow is mostly gone now. Not completely. It clings in long, dirty streaks in the shadows, sulking in ditches and along the northern walls where the sun doesn't hit. But the open spaces, mud. Thick, glorious, boot-eating mud. And for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, you can see the actual shape of the land again. The hills, the fence lines, the road you forgot existed. It's all there, just as it was before the white veil covered everything. You step outside into a morning that smells like wet grass, damp wood, and faintly, miraculously, like spring. Your breath doesn't fog, your nose doesn't go numb, and the wind has finally stopped screaming like it wants revenge. Instead, it whistles a little, like it's moved on to better things, but you haven't. Not yet. You're still shaking off winter like a second skin, peeling it away slowly, suspicious of every warm gust, every drop of water, every glint of sun. Inside the house, everything drips. The walls sweat. The ceiling sags. The straw underfoot is soggy and blackened in patches. It smells like survival, but also like mould, like rot, like the stuff beneath your fingernails when you haven't scrubbed in months. Still, no one complains. Not seriously, not anymore, because you made it. You and the people crammed into this leaning, half-collapsing house of mud and smoke and fur and frostbitten dreams. You all survived the worst of it. The deadly stretch. The nights when the cold curled under the door like a living thing, when the fire died down and didn't come back, when someone didn't wake up in the morning. It almost took you, but it didn't. And that fact settles on your shoulders heavier than snow ever did. Historical fact. For settlers on the Great Plains and beyond, making it through winter wasn't a guarantee. The death toll from cold exposure, illness, accidents, and starvation was a grim reality of frontier life. Those who survived often marked the end of winter with relief, ritual, and, in some cases, almost religious reverence for the coming warmth. Fringe fact: there are stories, maybe half true, maybe not, about families who never opened their doors all winter, who blocked them shut with snow and packed earth, and only tunneled out when they saw water pooling near the ceiling. Some say those families emerged pale and silent, blinking into the light like cave dwellers. One tale claims a man greeted spring by kissing the ground until his nose bled. Open debate. Was it better to brave the winter alone or in a group? Diaries suggest both had their risks. Solitude drove some to madness. Overcrowding brought sickness and friction. What's clear is that no one escaped unchanged. Winter remade everyone who endured it. The day you realise the path to the creek has opened, you walk it like a pilgrimage. The snow is gone there, the ice broken apart into pale slivers that drift in lazy spirals. The water is shallow but moving, and for the first time in months you see reflections. Real ones. Not just frost on glass or your own haunted face in a dark window. You see sky, clouds, light dancing. You kneel and press your hands into the water. It's cold enough to burn, but you don't pull away. You just hold them there, elbows deep, watching the dirt rinse off your skin in ribbons. The pain feels real, alive, like proof that you're still here, that you've outlasted something that tried very hard to outlast you. When you return to the house, you find everyone in motion, cleaning, rearranging, scrubbing what can be scrubbed. What can't be fixed is burned. The old straw bedding, the half-rotted crates, a pair of mittens that disintegrated in the last thaw, all go into the fire or out into the field to be forgotten. You help clear the roof. Mud slides off in wet sheets. A shingle breaks loose and nearly takes your ear off. You laugh for a solid 5 minutes, half joy, half hysteria, but no one stops you. They're laughing too. Even the goat seems happier. She's begun escaping again, which is deeply annoying and somehow deeply reassuring. You don't even mind when she eats half of your shirt drying on the fence. It's warm enough now to survive without it. Mostly. At some point, someone opens the windows and says, "Well, that's it, we made it." But you don't all cheer. You don't dance. You just nod. Because it's not over. Not really. It's never over out here. There will be spring storms. There will be floods. There will be hard planting and harder work and nights that still get cold enough to nip your fingers. But you are different now. Your hands remember the feel of frostbite. Your back remembers the ache of carrying firewood through shoulder-high snow. Your skin remembers the sting of breath that turned to ice before it left your lips. You will never forget the sound of silence when the fire died and the night had teeth. And you remember Elias, his corner, his blanket, the way everyone moved closer after he was gone. You carry all of it with you into the thaw. That night, you don't sleep in your coat, just a sweater. You leave your boots by the door, unlaced, and for the first time in 4 months you go to bed without your axe beside you. It leans quietly against the wall like a soldier finally at rest. The fire is still burning, but it's not desperate, just soft, just steady. You lie down, the air cool but not cruel, and listen to the drip of water from the ceiling. It no longer sounds like a warning. It sounds like change. You close your eyes, and for once, you don't dream of cold. You dream of green things, of dirt, of sweat that comes from digging, not shivering, of warmth that doesn't need to be earned every single hour. And when morning comes, you'll walk out into a muddy, messy, beautiful world. Not the same person who walked in, not by a long shot, so you made it. Not just through the winter, but through the story of it. The cold, the cracks in the walls, the fire that never quite reached the corners, the goat with an attitude problem, the snow that seemed like it would never stop falling. You survived the choking smoke, the sour stew, the nights with your axe tucked under your arm and your breath fogging against the blanket. You learned to listen to the wind, to feel the shift in the air before a storm, and to tell time by the drip of melting ice. You saw how hard it was, how long, how quiet, how real. Not just the danger, but the waiting. The decisions made by candlelight, the people huddled in silence, the little, desperate joys, hot stones in bed, a single candle that didn't go out, the fire flaring back to life right when you thought it was gone. And in the end, the world didn't suddenly get easier, but it did change. The snow melted, the sun came back, the ice cracked open like a secret, and all those frozen dirt-covered pioneers, they crawled out of their winter shells, blinking, stiff, and very much alive. Not untouched, but still here. Maybe that's all survival really is. Not a grand victory, just making it one more night, one more week, one more thaw. So as you close your eyes now, think about the quiet strength of people who faced winter without a fireplace and found heat anyway, in blankets, in bodies, in sheer will. And if tonight's a little cold where you are, just imagine a fur coat flipped inside out, a stone warmed by fire, and a roof made of dirt that held the wind at bay. You'll sleep fine.